Hi, I'm Kelly Schulz, Maryland Secretary of Commerce. On behalf of Governor Larry Hogan, welcome to the Maryland Iron Festival, virtual edition, Traveling the Iron Road. This event will commemorate iron furnaces and feature tours and information about iron towns in a celebration of industry. Heritage tourism is an important part of Maryland's economy, and this festival will transport you to iron furnaces across the state and in Pennsylvania. For example, did you know that Snow Hill in Worcester County has the only furnace in Maryland ever to make the extensive use of bog ore? Called Nassawango, it was erected in 1830 and named for the creek upon which it sits. Many other furnaces in Maryland and Pennsylvania will be visited during the virtual festival, which will also feature traditional blacksmithing, periodic music, traditional food preparation demonstrations, garden and trail tours, artisan demonstrations, children's activities, fascinating archaeology talks about the amazing discoveries at Catoctin Furnace, and more. Visitors will also meet the workers, both African American and European American, who created the industrial backbone of the United States. For instance, after a 45-year focus on the European American workers at the Catoctin Furnace in Frederick County, researching and interpreting the heritage of the enslaved is now a primary focus, as is knowledge transfer a reparative action. This agenda manifests in programs such as the Hands-On Heritage at Work initiative for at-risk youth is an effort to save young lives while restoring historic structures and sharing the history of all Marylanders. Further, improvement of the lives of the village residents through economic and social benefits emanating from the historic site and through visitation to events is a goal of this event and the Historical Society. This, in turn, makes the historic village an attractive place to live, work, and care about. While the festival this weekend is virtual, an in-person Maryland Iron Festival is planned for the weekend of September 18th and 19th, and we hope to be able to welcome you in person. And mark your calendar now for the 4th annual Maryland Iron Festival in 2022. On Saturday, May 21st, and Sunday, May 22nd, we hope to be sharing the rich history of iron making in person within the historic village and buildings in Cunningham Falls State Park and throughout Catoctin Mountain Park. Thank you and enjoy the show.
world is dark and cold.
Welcome to the 2021 Maryland Iron Festival. I'm Amy Whitney, the manager at the beautiful Thurmont Regional Library, which you see behind me. The architects who designed this building took their inspiration from the Isabella Furnace at nearby Catoctin Furnace. You can see that the stack at the heart of the library looks very much like the stonework in the Isabella stack. We're so proud of our iron-making heritage in this area of northern Frederick County, Maryland. If you visit the Catoctin Furnace area or drive the Iron Road, please stop by and see us at the library. From all of us at Frederick County Public Libraries, we hope you enjoy the Maryland Iron Festival events.
Welcome to the Maryland Iron Festival. This video, featuring Time Chef Henry Ward, was filmed at the Catoctin Furnace Historical Society's Collier's House in Thurmont, Maryland. Before European immigrants and enslaved Africans lived and worked at the Catoctin Furnace, the land was home to Susquehannock, Five Nations Iroquois, Shawnee, Tuscarora, and Piscataway.
Welcome. Welcome to lovely Catoctin Furnace here in the Catoctin Valley. We're in the Catoctin Furnace Historical District in the Collier's House. We're going to use this as our base of operations for cooking today. We're going to be serving you a country feast, both a breakfast and a dinner, focusing on seasonal and regional foods that folks in this area, white folks, black folks, and also some of the Native Americans would have eaten 100, 200, 300, 500 years ago. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We are cooking breakfast here in the Collier's house in front of the hearth. And one of the items we're going to have is classic Pennsylvania Dutch scrapple, which is a cooked breakfast product. It is part of the Use the Complete Pig package. It's a joke about nothing goes to waste from the tail to the squeal. You go ahead and you're going to get your loin and your ribs and hams, the things that are high on the hog. Living high on the hog is the better cuts of meat. And then you're going to work your way down to the trotters, and then you're going to get to having to dig out the smaller pieces of meat. And so you can go ahead and grind those up in your sausage grinder, and some fat, salt, pepper, and some other seasonings. A little bit of sage is nice. However, at some point, the pieces of meat get even too small for that. And so you might go ahead and cook them in stock that will solidify gel when it chills. That's what's called head cheese or sauce. And sort of a step down from there is you take the really tiny bits and you grind those up and mix them with some cornmeal, salt and pepper, and you make scrapple. And so scrapple, really Pennsylvania Dutch, maybe a little bit into the Midwest, but get around here, go into a diner, ham, sausage, bacon, or scrapple. And so we cut it very thinly with a sharp knife. You want to cut it when it's cold. It's a little bit tricky to handle, and you're going to cook it until it's nice and crispy on both sides. And so we're going to go ahead and heat up the griddle and get that cooking. All right. The secret about scrapple is to let it sit and not stick. You give it a second, then you go back and you make sure that it's not sticking to the pan. Now, we are going to talk about perhaps the most American of all foodstuffs, corn. Corn, Z maize, indigenous to the New World, now provides, it's estimated, more calories than anything else on the planet except for rice. It was unknown in the old world, of course, until Columbus. But once the Europeans arrived, they realized that corn grew very prolifically, learned that from the Native Americans, grew in any kind of climate you could try to go out in, including the desert, and it was very nutritious. And so corn meal, corn bread, corn pone, ash cakes, hoe cakes, johnny cakes, baked, steel pan cornbread, corn dodgers were a part of almost every meal. Also corn baked into puddings, into mush, into corn mush. You'd essentially polenta. You'd cook the cornmeal, let it set, slice it, and cook it, and you could serve that for breakfast. But today what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and make a corn pone, basically a corn pancake. And corn, like every other food that we talk about historically, has a bright history and a dark history. And so there's an Afro-American chef, Michael Whitty, from the Maryland area, and he talks about cornbread. And, yes, it could be a delicious, full of bacon cracklings and sugar and butter and eggs and delicious and tastes like a cake. But there were people whose cornbread was much simpler than that, who talk about going out to the animal troughs and picking up individual corn kernels until they got a handful. And they could go, you can't eat corn, dried corn straight, it's indigestible, but literally grinding it down on a rock, finding a little bit of water, and then, going and finding, the hearth and making a cake and actually putting it into the ashes. So at least it cooks through to help release the nutrition. But again, that ash cake was pretty low subsistence. They cooked and put in the pocket and taken out to the field, and then you would nibble on that for the rest of the day. And it's also interesting because cornbread has become part of an interesting story, a cornbread and buttermilk. I talk to Southern folk of a certain age who talk about it fondly as a snack, almost like a dessert. A big old bowl of a glass of buttermilk, sweet cornbread broken up, eaten with a spoon. But the actual story of that recipe, if you go back in time, buttermilk isn't the rich, cultured product that we have today. It is what was left over when you made butter. And so it's basically skim milk, not much protein in it. And so it was a leftover. It was a waste product. You weren't going to throw it out. You were going to either serve it to the animals, or in the slave economy, it would also have been served to the slaves. And cornbread, yes, it's delicious, cooked right off the stove, but there was cornbread cooked every day. So there was probably a basket of stale cornbread somewhere in the kitchen. And so the recipe, you take a trough, you break up the cornbread, you pour the buttermilk over it. If you have some pot liquor, which is what is left when you cook your greens, you might put that in as well. You stir it up, basically just something that you could put into your body to give you sustenance. That is taken out and served on the porch. And again, served the same way, whether it was going to the animals or to the slave children. Very often, again, they would grab a mussel shell or something and sit around on the ground and eat this basically mush. But it was what was available, and you ate what you had to eat. And the challenge, I've been studying and doing some work on the slave population at a plantation in Virginia. And the dynamic around the food with the enslaved population, again, these plantations are growing crops, but they're also growing food. And slaves rarely got more than they could eat. So they were always hungry. And so the dynamic of basically having hungry people grow your food for you is a very interesting one. And the dynamic of what you were given, what you could barter, what you could grow, what you could hunt. You go down to the spring and get a fish and cook that yourself. But again, very often you were having to do with what was left over from the white family's table and what little provisions you were given. But on the other hand, cornbread is delicious and it's become a Southern staple. And so we're going to make a really simple kind of cornbread today. Here we have basically cornmeal, and this is a little bit fancier than an ash cake. So we put a little bit of baking powder to get some leavening. We're also going to add a little bit of salt. And so here is actually, we were just talking about buttermilk. And so this is actual cultured buttermilk. And you can see it's a little thicker. In fact, go ahead, I got a jar here. You can see that buttermilk is actually pretty thick, which is not the way that it would have been historically. Because again, you're taking the fat out to make the butter, like the churn we have here. And so again, it would have, the historical buttermilk would have had a slightly sour flavor from what's called the clabbering, the souring, but it would not actually be thick like this. But it does add a really nice flavor. So we're making a real simple batter here, and we're going to let it sit for a little while to get set up. Water. And now we're going to cook these on the griddle. I would call that a golden brown. Okay, here we go for our next dish. We're going to start it off here on the griddle so you can see it, and then we're going to go finish it off cooking it in the hearth. This is actually also a Pennsylvania Dutch, but a family recipe, actually on my side. My grandmother's nickname was actually Dutch. She came from the Rise family, and this was one of her specialties. So we're giving away the family recipes, and you're lucky with this one, because it is delicious. This is called a golden buck. We're not sure what the name means or where it comes from. There is a British dish called a golden buck, which is a variant on Welsh rarebit, so cream, cheese sauce over toast. This has cheese, but I don't really see the connection. But basically what you're going to do, you have a nice frying pan, you're going to get it nice and hot, and you're going to go ahead and basically break as many eggs as you have people eating, 2 per person. So this is basically a breakfast casserole dish. Just evenly space them around the pan. You can add a little bit of bacon, a little bit of ham if you want, but it's actually just delicious, just as it is. So, again, I'm going to go ahead. So maybe one more. Nice balance to it. All right, I think we're good here. You're going to then salt and pepper well. Now this is the salt. You want to be careful because the next ingredient is cheese. So if you have a salty cheese, don't add too much salt. And as you can see, the eggs are beginning to set there on the bottom. And then you're going to go into your cheese drawer and get all those little ends and bibs and bobs of cheese that you have. You're going to go ahead and cut them up into little shapes. You know, some shaved, some slices, and you're just going to layer the cheese on top of the eggs. So eggs and cheese, what could be better? And also, again, you've got a cow, so you have cheese, you got a chicken, and so you have eggs. So this was a dish that could be made by almost anybody. And you're using up little dried ends of cheese that are probably going to get moldy and thrown away anyway. All right, so you got that nice and covered. Put this down in the coals. And carefully, I'm going to put some coals on top around so that this is the equivalent of going into the oven. So we're going to be cooking from the bottom with the direct heat from the coals, and then we're going to be cooking indirectly from the top, and that's going to melt the cheese and cook the eggs all the way through. And so that is not going to take too long. All right, there we have a golden buck.
My name is Andre Weltman with the Friends of Pine Grove Furnace and the Cumberland County Historical Society. Welcome to the Carlisle Iron Works, located in Boiling Springs, Pennsylvania, about 5 miles south of the town of Carlisle, PA. This charcoal-fired furnace first began making iron around 1762, making it one of the very earliest operations west of the Susquehanna River. This furnace was supplanted by an anthracite-fired furnace built a few hundred yards away in 1882. However, the Catoctin Furnace only operated for about 10 years. The village of Boiling Springs became nationally famous in the late 1840s because of a legal case involving the Underground Railroad. The beautiful village of Boiling Springs preserves a number of features from the industrial era here, including the Ironmaster's Mansion, built in 1795 by Michael Egge. It overlooks what we now call Children's Lake, originally the source of water power for the iron-making operations. The site of the former Catoctin Furnace is today the Boiling Springs Community Swimming Pool.
Greetings from the site of the historic Maria Furnace. In March of 1826, a tract of 200 acres along Owens Creek in the Iron Springs Valley of Hamiltonban Township, Pennsylvania, was deeded to Thaddeus Stevens, John B. McPherson, Thomas C. Miller, and John D. Paxton. It was here along the Great Wagon Road that these proprietors intended to construct an iron furnace. However, it is not known for sure when it first went into blast. What we do know is that in April 1828, McPherson and Miller sold their shares to Stevens and Paxton, who then formed J.D. Paxton and Company. We assume that it was at this time that the property was named Maria Furnace after Paxton's wife, Miss Maria Miller, daughter of William Miller, Esquire of Fairfield. Other nearby tracts were acquired for iron making and charcoal production. 438 acres were purchased from William Miller and a large ore bank from Benjamin Reed. The source of the company's limestone is unknown, but was probably not far off in the township. A catalog of the Maria Furnace's products has never been located, and for now we are only aware of 10-plate cast iron stoves. Interestingly, the three known examples have three different markings. 1, Maria Furnace, Adams County. 2, J.D. Paxton and Company, Maria Furnace. And the third, simply Maria Furnace. The demise of stove making at Maria was due to the poor quality of the local ore that created brittle plates. The addition of good hematite ore from near Cashtown, a bit north of here, only succeeded in making stoves more costly because of the increased transportation expenses bringing the ore to the furnace. In 1837, only 11 years after it began, Maria Furnace was closed. One of Maria's last castings was an arch made for Stevens' new furnace at Caledonia, northwest of here in Franklin County. About this, the following story is told. One of the workers at the furnace was very proud of his large hands, and just before the arch, which was to have the year marked on it, was cast, placed his hands in the wet sand on each side of the date, and the 1837 rests between the prints of a furnace man's hands. These prints can still be seen on the arch of the old furnace stack at Caledonia. A stone's throw west of the Maria Furnace stack ruins stood the large stone mansion house of J.D. Paxton, who managed the property and lived here for some time. The house in this undated photo is supposed to have existed until at least 1913. Behind the stack and house runs the Western Maryland Railroad, now CSX, which generally follows the old tapeworm railroad bed, except that here the tapeworm was about 100 yards further up the hill. Much time and many trains have passed here since, and many of Maria's stones repurposed, so that only the remains of the furnace are here now to remind us of our history.
My name is Andre Waltman, the chairman of the Friends of Pine Grove Furnace and with the Cumberland County Historical Society. Welcome to Pine Grove Furnace, located in Cumberland County, Pennsylvania, in the modern Pine Grove Furnace State Park. This iron operation, we think, began around 1771, and they continued smelting iron here until April of 1895 with a few economic interruptions. So that's from just before the American Revolution until exactly 30 years after the Civil War. The ironworks here included a forge at the park's modern Laurel Lake, built in 1830, where pig iron from this furnace was converted into wrought iron. The modern state park preserves various other buildings from the industrial era, including the beautiful Ironmaster's Mansion, the Paymaster's Cabin, the mule stables now used as the park general store, and a 1783 grist mill, which now houses the Appalachian Trail Museum. Let's go take a look. This is the ironmaster's mansion at Pine Grove Furnace. This beautiful brick structure was constructed in 1827 to 1829 by ironmaster Peter Egge. This building is at least the third structure to serve as an ironmaster's mansion here at Pine Grove Furnace. Today it is used as an overnight hostel for Appalachian Trail hikers and can be rented as a special venue for weddings and other events. While we're at the ironmaster's mansion, which is the top of the social pyramid in an old iron plantation, it's worth thinking for a minute about the history of slavery here. Many of the early ironmasters at Pine Grove Furnace held enslaved workers, and this was true even of Peter Egge, who constructed this mansion, although it was decades prior to it being built. This is also an opportunity to think about the Underground Railroad. Remarkably, for a location that held enslaved workers, just a few generations later, Pine Grove Furnace was used as a stop on the Underground Railroad. There's a mythology that has built up that fugitives actually hid in the basement of this mansion, but that seems unlikely. There were probably smarter places to hide across the industrial complex. This is the old grist mill or flour mill at Pine Grove Furnace. Now, why would an iron company own an agricultural processing operation? They tried to be as self-sufficient as possible in feeding both their human and animal workers. So this iron company owned 5 farms on its own mountain property. One of them, today known as Camp Michaud, has its own interesting history during the 20th century. Today, this grist mill building houses the Appalachian Trail Museum, which opened in 2010. Its location is appropriate because Pine Grove Furnace is very close to the exact midpoint of the Appalachian Trail. This is the general store at Pine Grove Furnace, located in an old mule stables. This location is famous among Appalachian Trail hikers because through hikers who reach the halfway point in their journey from Georgia to Maine stop here for the half-gallon challenge, where they try to eat a half-gallon of ice cream in one sitting. This is the paymaster's office at Pine Grove Furnace. Originally, workers would climb up the stairs, receive their pay, or at least have a notation in the clerk's books, and then come back down the stairs. Today, this building is a rental cabin that sleeps 6 in the modern state park. The modern state park office is housed in an 1850s boarding house. Another beautiful building still at Pine Grove Furnace is this 1870 chapel, built for the workers by owner J. Cook. It is still used as a house of worship today. The South Mountain Railroad, connecting Pine Grove Furnace to Carlisle, was only completed in 1870. Prior to that, all heavy objects had to be hauled in teamsters' wagons in and out of the mountains. Pine Grove Furnace State Park includes 2 lakes, both of which are the result of industrial activity, but for very different reasons. This is the smaller of the lakes, Fuller Lake, named for the ironmaster Jackson Fuller. It was originally an ore pit, which was 90 feet deep when they stopped using it in the 1890s. This is Laurel Lake, the larger of the 2 lakes at Pine Grove Furnace State Park. This body of water was created in 1830 to provide water power for Laurel Forge. The dam you see today was constructed in 1968, replacing a timber crib dam that dated all the way back to the original iron forge. There's a direct connection between Catoctin Furnace in Maryland and Pine Grove Furnace in Pennsylvania. Thomas Thornburg was one of the early ironmasters, and Benjamin Blackford was the Pine Grove Furnace clerk. Now, Thomas Thornburg and Benjamin Blackford had a dispute with another ironmaster who took over the operation, Michael Egge, and they went to Shippensburg and then to Catoctin around 1801. Later, they went further south and continued iron-making operations in Virginia.
sunny day, my good girl left me, Lord, she went away. And now she's gone, and I don't worry, Lord, I'm sitting on top of the world. Well, she called me up from El Paso, saying, come back, Daddy, Lord, I need you so. And now she's gone, I don't worry, Lord, I'm sitting on top of the world. Mississippi River is deep and wide. The woman I'm loving is on the other side. And now she's gone, I don't worry, Lord, I'm sitting on top of the world. Don't like my peaches, don't you shake my tree. Stay out of my orchard, let my peaches be. And now she's gone, I don't worry, Lord, I'm sitting on top of the world. Ashes to ashes and dust to dust, show me a woman that a man can trust. Now she's gone and I don't worry, Lord, I'm sitting on top of the world. Ashes to ashes, sand to sand, show me a woman who can trust her man. And now she's gone, I don't worry, Lord, I'm sitting on top of the world. It was in the spring, one sunny day, my good girl left me, Lord, she went away. And now she's gone, and I don't worry, Lord, I'm sitting on top of the world. And now she's gone, and I don't worry, Lord, I'm sitting on top of the world.
Hi, I'm Claudia Nagel, Executive Director at Furnace Town. Welcome to our virtual tour. Nestled between the storied Pocomoke Forest and the Nassawango Creek Preserve, about 5 miles west of Snow Hill, stands the Nassawango Iron Furnace and its recreated 19th century village. Built in 1830 by the Maryland Iron Company, the 35-foot stone and brick structure spawned a town that was home to over 300 people, many of whom worked to make iron. There were blacksmiths, wheelwrights, iron workers, weavers, and coopers among the skilled workers. The cypress swamp held deposits of iron ore. They gathered the iron ore from the swamp, brought clam and oyster shells up the Pocomoke River from the Chesapeake Bay, and made charcoal from the hardwoods of the Pocomoke Forest to produce pig iron through the cold blast process. The iron was nicknamed pig iron because of the shape of the molds. The molds resemble a sow nursing her young piglets. Thus it was named pig iron. The area's natural resources were central to the production of iron. These materials were layered into the top of the furnace, heated to 3,000 degrees, and the resulting liquids were drawn off at the bottom of the furnace. Iron was poured into the molds, loaded onto mule-drawn barges, and carried to waiting ships for transportation to Baltimore, Philadelphia, and New York. In 1836, the furnace changed ownership several times before Thomas Spence of Worcester County purchased it and began producing pig iron at 700 tons per year. Spence is credited with the installation of the hot blast stove. The Nassawango Iron Furnace is structurally typical for its period, while distinctive in several ways. It smelted bog ore. It is mostly made of brick rather than stone, and of greatest significance, it is the earliest surviving American furnace that employed the hot blast. The cast iron hot blast stove at the top of the furnace stack was installed at Furnacetown less than a decade after the introduction of the process in Scotland. The Nassawango Furnace is listed on the National Register of Historic Places and recognized by the American Society of Mechanical Engineers as a National Historic Mechanical Engineering Landmark. Iron was produced at Nassawango until 1847, when labor shortages and poor market conditions forced Spence to shut down the furnace. The Nassawango Furnace and the surrounding village were left idle. The site became overgrown and the forest reclaimed much of the village structures. In 1982, Furnacetown Foundation, a private nonprofit organization, was formed to preserve and interpret the rich heritage of Furnacetown. Today, Furnacetown is home to 13 different buildings representing different aspects of 19th century life. The buildings at the site were relocated from other areas of Worcester County. It is one of the largest collections of 19th century buildings on the Eastern Shore. The buildings hold collections of period artifacts including a 300-year-old loom, a double forge, printing press, and broom-making equipment, to name a few. The Mount Zion Schoolhouse, circa 1859, is listed in the National Registry of Historic Places. It served students of Worcester County until 1931. Old Nazareth Church, one of the central institutions of the village, was moved to the site in 1980. The R. Frank Jones Museum is a rare and fine example of Gothic architecture and houses a broad collection of historic objects. It is named in honor of R. Frank Jones, who rediscovered the furnace in 1970 and became a leading advocate for its preservation. The working blacksmith shop is one of our most popular exhibits. It contains a double forge, and the Furnacetown Blacksmith Guild hold monthly meetings and demonstrations. Furnacetown is open April to October and hosts cultural events, artisan demonstration, family celebrations, and weddings. Our newly updated village store features work of local artists, local honey and cheese from the local dairy. The Paul Leifler Trail is accessed through Furnacetown. It's a mile loop hike through the cypress swamp, and scattered throughout our property are pollinator beds of natural plants and other unique species. The 25-acre site has something for everyone. Whether you're a student of history, outdoor enthusiast, or someone who enjoys nature, you can find it at Furnacetown. Thank you for joining us for our virtual tour. We hope to see you soon.
Hi, I'm Kelly Berliner. I'm the Eastern Regional Director for the Archaeological Conservancy.
And I'm Andre Weltman, the chairman of the Friends of Pine Grove Furnace State Park.
And today we are at the Big Pond Furnace Archaeological Preserve.
Big Pond Furnace in Cumberland County, PA, was first built in 1836. After a period of inactivity in the late 1870s, it was refurbished in 1879 by the Ahl family, prominent local iron makers. Fresh charcoal was made on the 6,000 acres of associated forest land and hauled down to the charcoal storage house here. However, the effort to restart this furnace ended abruptly on May 21st, 1880. A devastating fire began in the new hot charcoal stacked in front of the charcoal house. This fire destroyed the iron operation, which was never rebuilt. By 2011, the stone stack had partly collapsed, illustrating what happens to masonry structures if neglected. Gravity always wins. The ruins of this furnace include interesting features, including a Tuyere nose stone and the new but unused fire brick lining. Hence, the stack is of particular interest from an industrial archaeology perspective. Also, the original head race can be easily followed through the Michaud State Forest.
The Archaeological Conservancy is the only national nonprofit dedicated to preserving our country's most important archaeological sites. In 2019, we were contacted by local residents and history enthusiasts about this parcel of land containing the furnace. The parcel was going up for auction, and there was concern that this would be razed and that the area would potentially be developed. By working with these local groups, the Conservancy was able to acquire this property and preserve it for future educational and scientific investigations.
Welcome to Lancaster County and the mighty Susquehanna River. As long as the river flowed from southern New York and western Pennsylvania to the headwaters of the Chesapeake Bay, these waters have been a highway for Native Americans, timber rafters, the lumber industry, the canal system, and the production of pig iron from the 8 anthracite-fueled hot blast iron furnaces that stretched from Marietta downriver to Columbia. Rivertowns PA USA is a nonprofit 501c3 volunteer organization that seeks to enhance the art, heritage, and recreation of the river towns of Columbia, Marietta, Wrightsville, and the surrounding areas. We welcome you to the Musselman-Vesta Iron Furnace Center. The center is located in the new Marietta Iron Furnace Park on the east end of Marietta, Pennsylvania. The center is housed in the restored Musselman-Vesta Iron Furnace office building. The restoration was started in 2002 and continued until 2013 by members of the Rivertown Board and the Marietta Restoration Associates and many local restoration craftsmen and artists. The Musselman-Vesta Iron Furnace was established by Henry Musselman and Henry Watts, both from Marietta, in 1867. The furnace was the last of 8 anthracite-fueled hot blast iron furnaces in Lancaster County. The furnace was still in production in the early 1930s before going out of blast for the last time. The restored office building is the only major structure of the furnace complex still standing. You can take a self-guided tour of the furnace complex aided by 8 12x12 panels that describe the structures and how they were involved in the production of pig iron. The interior of the office building relates the mining, transportation of the raw materials, iron ore, anthracite coal, limestone, and the production of pig iron and the artifacts from the Henry Clay Furnace archaeological digs. The majority of the iron ore was mined from the Chestnut Hill Iron Quarry near Silver Springs, Pennsylvania. The ore was mined from the pit by hand and moved by mule-drawn wagons. The raw iron ore was loaded onto ore wagons and then pulled by mules or horses to the furnaces along the river. Once the wagons arrived at the furnace, the wagons were pulled onto a scale that weighed the load. Wagons unloaded by hand and then reweighed so that the teamsters could be paid. The anthracite coal was mined in northeast Pennsylvania, loaded in canal boats and floated down the rivers and then through the Pennsylvania Canal system to the furnace. The Pennsylvania Railroad came through Marietta in the 1930s. This increased the year-round availability of the coal. The third raw material was limestone, which was quarried in local pits. All of the raw materials used in the manufacturing of pig iron are on display in the center. Also displayed are finished byproducts, cast iron pots, and hardware manufactured in Marietta with iron produced at the furnaces. The center has watercolored furnace paintings by the late Klaus Gutzka. Klaus was born in Germany, and after World War II he and his wife moved to the United States. He was an engineer and artist. He illustrated many of the industrial subjects. Since 1961 he has visited nearly all the steel plants on this continent, drawing illustrations for magazine and publications. The following drawings and paintings are Klaus's work. Chickies No. 1 furnace was established in 1845 by the Haldeman family. Chickies No. 2, built by Stephen Engel in 1854. The St. Charles furnace, built by Clement Grubb, an ironmaster from the prominent Grubb iron mining and manufacturing family in 1854. The Henry Clay furnace, built by Peter Haldeman from Columbia in 1855, and the Musselman-Vesta furnace in 1867. A pocket-sized folding guide and map give a brief description of the iron furnaces to walkers and bikers along the Northwest River Trail. In the years between 1989 to 1995, Dr. June Evans, a professor at Millersville University, conducted summer archaeological studies at the Henry Clay Furnace. The Dr. June Evans Henry Clay exhibit was established in 2018 to display many of the artifacts were uncovered from the digs by the students. A friend of the center had donated the pulpit and pulpit chair from the furnace Sunday school. The chapel was established in 1888 to provide services for the workers of the Vesta, Donegal, and the two Marietta furnaces. The chapel was moved to East Market Street when Route 441 was established. The furnace complex is best seen by using the interactive HO scale diorama. The diorama was constructed using the site's Sanborn insurance map to determine the footprint of the structures and other buildings that were an essential part of the furnace operation. The rail lines were established by looking at the maps as well. Each one of the buildings is lighted. They are lighted by pushing a button located on the side of the diorama. These lights aid in drawing attention to the building that is being talked about during the PowerPoint presentation of the furnace complex. The Pennsylvania Canal System is also part of the diorama, with a scale model canal boat loaded with coal. In 2017, the Musselman-Vesta Iron Furnace Center was awarded the Preservation Pennsylvania Award for Community Initiative, and in 2020, the Outstanding Program of the Year by the Pennsylvania Council for Social Studies. We invite you to come learn about the Lancaster County iron industry. Explore the site as we uncover more of the furnace structures in the complex. The complex is open from April to October. Guided tours of the site are available and tours conducted by the Lancaster County Park naturalists are offered. There are 2 Lancaster County iron furnace walking tours, one in the spring and one in the fall, along the Northwest River Trail. These tours include other furnace sites in the Susquehanna River floodplain. Homeschoolers and small local school class tours are available upon request. Trust to see you as you continue on your tour of the Iron Road.
Hello, my name is Eric Creeder, and I'm a park ranger here at Cunningham Falls and Gainesville State Parks. Behind me is the Catoctin Iron Furnace, which is located along Route 806 just south of Thurmont, Maryland. The furnace operated from 1776 until 1903 under many different owner-operators. They made iron ore-based products such as war munitions, cookware, and 10-plate wood stove. We invite you to visit the historic furnace site and nearby Catoctin Village anytime. See you soon.
The miner is gone, we'll see him no more. God be with that miner where'er he may roll. God pity the miner, protect him as well. His mining's all over, poor miner, farewell. Always loved that song. The hard-working miner, that comes from the coal fields. But here today I want to talk a little bit about the iron ore fields. The Catoctin Furnace in Maryland. I'm up here in Danville, Pennsylvania. My name is Van Wagner, and I thought I'd talk a little bit about the iron ores, the hematite. This is Pennsylvania hematite, and it's going to be very similar to some of the hematite you're going to find in the Maryland belts as well. This is actually the same rock right here. Above water table, it tends to be really weathered and orange. You can almost rub it off on your skin. And below the water table, it tends to be a little bit harder and red. So you might see these specimens pretty common through the Appalachian Mountain region. What I thought I would talk about briefly here with the advent of a phone is I'm going to take you on a little field trip. I want to demonstrate some of the mining tools that are used in the 1800s, especially for mining for iron ore. And then I'm going to take you on a field trip. There's an abandoned iron ore mine here on my property in Montour County, Pennsylvania that I thought you'd appreciate seeing. So I'm excited to be invited to talk to you all about iron ore mining. I love mining. I don't know what it is. My dad took me at a young age to a mine on this mountain behind me. This is Montour Ridge. And when I was a boy, my dad took me to an iron ore mine when I was a kid, a long abandoned iron ore mine. But the bug bit me, and I've been interested in mining history ever since. I became a coal miner actually in 2001. I worked underground in Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania in an anthracite coal mine. And I have my underground laborer's papers from Mine Safety Health Administration. So I'm not a certified miner, I'm a certified laborer. The term of miner, especially in historic times, that's a title of distinction. You didn't just walk in one day and become a miner. It took a lifetime of training and apprenticeship until you finally earned the right to take the mining exam. So I'm going to use that term loosely today when I say, mining and miners. But I do want to make that distinction that, especially by the latter half of the 1800s, to be a miner meant something. Okay, that wasn't a term that was just thrown around. It was a trade. So let me start with showing some of the miners' tools. First and foremost, the ore miners, hard rock mining, it started with this drill. It's called a star bit drill. And this one's only about 3 feet long. Sometimes they'd be longer. These are getting very hard to find. And it's really a two-man job. One man is going to swing a sledgehammer, and the other man is going to hold they had all kinds of cool nicknames. I've heard this called a jumper. I've heard it called a steel, but the star bit drill. So imagine that we're down in the mines. We're in the ore bank. One man's going to hold the star bit drill up against the rock where we want to drill the hole, and the other man's going to swing the sledgehammer. And every time he hits it, then you're going to turn it a quarter turn. Quarter turn. Sometimes they'd call that the shaker. The man who's holding this, they call it the shaker. In fact, one of my favorite American folk songs is John Henry. And he's not exactly a miner, but he's the next best thing. He's drilling a rock tunnel through a mountain for the railroad. And he says, John Henry says to the shaker, "Shaker, you had better pray, because if I miss that 6 feet of steel, tomorrow's going to be your burying day." It's because the shaker's holding the drill bit like this. Look where that sledgehammer's hitting, right? So if I miss that 6 feet of steel, tomorrow's going to be your burying day, because John Henry's saying I'd smack you in the head. Can you imagine the hearing damage this would do? You're down in small quarters. I'm barely tapping it right now, so I don't, give you too much noise, but this is going to be an incredible amount of noise that you're going to hear all day long. Drilling, 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 so that in that hole you can place your explosives. Now keep in mind, dynamite was not invented until fairly modern times. I believe it was late 1880s, early 1890s that nitroglycerin and dynamite really came on the scene. So in much of the era that we're talking about here at the Catoctin Furnace, it would be black powder. Let me get my black powder charge here ready for you all. Black powder in the shape of, well, I have my dummy. I don't have a real one here. It's probably for the best. Black powder is dangerous stuff, but I have my dummy. You would take just a broom handle like this, and you'd put wax paper around it. Pull the dummy out, and the wax paper is now the perfect shape of your charge. In there, you'd measure out your black powder charge. You'd put your black powder in there, and you'd tie it up. The nice thing about wax paper is it's watertight, so it's waterproof explosives. A lot of water down in the mines. You've heard the saying, keep your powder dry. Wet black powder is worthless. Then what you're going to do is you're going to push your black powder charge to the back of the hole. This is a pretty fancy tool called a tamping bar. And most of the tamping bars I've ever seen are actually just broom handles. In fact, when I was a coal miner, the tamping bar we used was a broom handle. I'll tell you what makes this one fancy. It's metal, and the end of it, so that it doesn't spark, is copper. And I want you to remember that little notch. We're going to come back to that notch later. But this is for pushing that wax paper charge of black powder back into the back of the hole where we drilled. And then we're going to take the miner's needle. A miner's needle often has a handle on the end. It's slightly tapered, and it is copper. I have seen them made out of iron. I wouldn't want to use one out of iron because, again, spark is the danger around black powder. Copper won't spark. We're going to put this in that hole to our black powder charge. Remember how I said this has a little groove, a little notch on the bottom? They go together as a set, one on top of the other, and you push dust and dirt into the back of the hole. So I'm going to take a handful of dust and dirt, put it up in the hole, and then I'm going to tamp it totally closed. And you would want to do this pretty well. If you don't take the time to do this step, what'll happen when we set off our explosives, it's not going to be an explosive. It's going to be a sparkler. It's just going to go shh, and it's going to make a bunch of sparks. The whole point here is we want the explosives to be trapped in the ore and boom, blow the ore loose. So we're going to tamp it shut. Now, what we're going to do, now that it's tamped shut, we're going to pull our needle out of the hole. And now, instead of a real big hole going back to our explosive, we have a very small hole, the diameter of this needle. And in that hole, we're going to put our squib. You could think of it as a fuse, the squib. And the squib would be about the size of a straw. About the size of a straw. And you'd put that up in there. And what it is, they often were straw from a farmer's field, but they were straws with black powder packed in them. I'd put that up in the hole. And when the time is ready, I'd give a warning to all the other men and boys down in the mine. Fire in the hole! Fire in the hole! And I'd light it. And what happens is it starts smoldering. And when it eventually gets to that black powder, it shoots back the hole like a bottle rocket. They work surprisingly well. I had someone mail me a box of these, probably from the 1920s, that they found somewhere in a storage closet. I think it's entirely illegal to have mailed them, and I do not advise that anyone ever does that. They came to me unsolicited. Someone said, "You're a history buff, you want these things." And I opened them up. I thought, my goodness, these things never should have been mailed. But then I was curious. I've never seen a squib go off, so I took one outside, and my sons and I, got some matches, lighted it. It shot like a bottle rocket, 100 years later. So they work quite well. Now, you don't leave the mine when your charges are detonating. You have to make sure you listen and make sure all your charges go off. So let's assume that we actually set several charges, 4, maybe 5 charges at a time. We're going to go down in the mine, maybe around what's called the monkey heading or the miner heading, around the turn, around the bend. And we're going to be sitting there eating our lunch, and we're going to be listening. Boom, 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 boom. Was that 4 or was that 5? You were supposed to be counting. I don't know how many that was. Well, I'll tell you what, it was probably all of them. So let's go in and check on them. And miners would walk back in and boom, they'd walk into an explosion. Sometimes the fuse would still be smoldering. And you might think, well, why wouldn't they just play it safe and go home that day? Folks, you only got paid for the ore you mined. And here in Danville, Pennsylvania, in the 1860s and 1870s, it was about $1 a day. It was about $1 for a ton of iron ore. So you only got that $1 for your ton of iron ore if you got the iron ore out that day. So if you're going to say, oh, I'm going to play it safe and I'm going to go home and I'll come back tomorrow, your family doesn't eat tonight. So that was the urgency for getting your iron ore out. A couple other things I just want to point out while I'm here with my bag of goodies. The iron ore is eventually going to be melted, and they're going to melt it into pig iron. The two fuels that were used in American furnaces. Charcoal is one. This mountain you see behind me, in fact, exactly behind me, used to be a place where they made charcoal. And last year for the Catoctin Furnace, this is exactly what I talked about, the charcoal. But some furnaces tried to switch over to anthracite coal or even coke from soft coal. This is the kind of coal I mined. When I was a coal miner, we mined Schuylkill County anthracite. And the catch is this. You can make iron from charcoal pretty much as is. The furnace, you throw this in the furnace and you can get it hot enough to 2,500 degrees to melt your iron ore. With coal, with anthracite coal, you have to capture the vent, the hot air coming out of the furnace, and you have to use that heat that's leaving the furnace to preheat your fresh air that you're blowing into the furnace. In other words, you can't just blow cold air on an anthracite fire. It's not quite hot enough to melt iron ore. You have to have what's called a hot blast furnace. You have to take those hot fumes, preheat your fresh air to several hundred degrees, and that's going to give you just the added boost you need to go ahead and melt your iron ore. Okay, I promised you a field trip. Let's go on a field trip. I'm going to leave all this here, and I'm going to take you to an iron ore mine. One of the good things about technology, I suppose, is I can take you where I normally wouldn't take anybody, because this is a pretty private place. It's pretty secluded, and I try to keep it that way because I don't want anybody going in this thing. Next stop, the iron ore mine. Pretty beautiful spot here in the woods of Montour County. So what you want to look for to find mines, right here in front of us is what's called a tailing. I'm going to walk out on it. It's a lump, pretty unnatural lump. Let's go for a little walk. Okay, can you see this? We're on a lump, and if you have really good resolution on your screen, there's a second lump over there. Pretty big, about a 2-car garage size lump. So that tells me, if we're going to look this way in just a moment, we're going to see a mine, because they would mine into the mountain, and they'd bring anything out that wasn't iron ore, and they'd dump it in this tailing. So when you find these tailings, go straight into the mountain, and that's usually where you find the mine entrance. So let's go check out this mine. All right, so let's try and explain this, what you're looking at. I was out here hunting. I knew we had quite a bit of iron ore mining in the area, but I was hunting and I looked at this mound and I thought, golly, that's a mine tailing. I've seen enough tailings to know that's a mine tailing. And typically, where a mine entrance was, they did not bring their waste rock out and dump it uphill, unless they had some kind of mechanism to do so. Either a steam hoist or a donkey gin or something that would power, lift the buggies up. Otherwise, they're just following it on the grade, on the level, and they're going to come out and dump their waste. So when I saw this mine tailing, it's right over here, I knew that if there was an entrance, it was right here. And when I started digging, this is where the mountain was, right here. And it was just a slope on the side of a mountain. So I decided I'd come home after work every day, and I dug 20 5-gallon buckets worth of soil every day out of the spot. And it was noticeably loose and soft, and I thought, okay, that's a clue, but this went on for weeks and weeks, and my wife and sons definitely had a little fun with me and thought, Dad's nuts, he's out there digging for nothing. And then one day, back in there, obviously there were no timbers here, I've put those timbers in. Way back in there one day, the pick just fell out of my hands as I dug. And I saw an opening. When I got down in there, I shined a light in. The tunnel goes this way quite a ways, and it also goes this way quite a ways. And then it turns and goes into the mountain that way. It's not a terribly long mine, but it was quite a gratifying feeling when all of a sudden I tapped into the old workings. So let's talk about what you're looking at now, and then I'll also try and give you a taste of what went on here. This is called a cap piece or a collar, and my mine timbers and a cap piece. Some people call it a set, a collar and a set. So what I've done here is actually when I was a coal miner, this is still how we timber the mines to this day. So I wanted to timber this up for a few reasons. One is for safety, so it doesn't collapse. But also I wanted to give it the look of what it probably looked like in the mid-1800s when it was an operating mine. Now, I couldn't take you down in, got a leaf blowing in the way here. I couldn't take you down in because the roof is quite unstable, which leads me to the next point. Why in the world would I have done this on my property, and why do I still have an opening here? One is, it's the historical significance that this iron ore mine, I feel like, is an important replica opening that I want to be able to bring people here occasionally and show them what an opening would look like. Just if nothing else, so young people who I bring here can see it and think, my goodness, I've got it so good. Can you imagine making a living of $1 a day in a hole like this? Kind of makes you appreciate the life we have. So that was one reason. But the other is I'm an environmental science teacher. I teach high school here at a school called Lewisburg High School. And we study something in my environmental science class called white nose syndrome. It's a disease that's been killing something like 98, 99% of cave bats in the Appalachian Mountain region. It's an absolute tragedy. So when we dug into this, it occurred to me, whatever's killing bats, whatever this fungus is, it's only been around for about the past 20 years. It occurred to me that this is a bit of a time capsule. This thing has been sealed since about the time of the Civil War, if I were to guess. No one's mined iron ore in this particular spot for a good 150 years. So since then, it kind of caved in and was sealed. So it occurred to me that this was a bit of a petri dish, if you will. Whatever microbes were living in there were different, in my estimation, than what are in mines and caves that are suffering white nose syndrome. So I contacted several biologists, one with the Pennsylvania Game Commission, Greg Turner. He's our leading bat biologist here in Pennsylvania with the Game Commission. And also Barry Wolferton. He's with Lock Haven University. And he came in with Greg Turner, and they helped me do a site study here to determine exactly, is there something we can learn about the microbial relationships in this mine, comparing it to other mines and caves. And the research is still ongoing. It's too new. I only opened this thing up a year and a half ago. But it gave a bit of a validity to Dad's crazy digging. My wife and kids, crazy dad down there digging in the woods. But my hope is if this can play in some way, play a role in the conversation of improving the health of our wildlife here in Pennsylvania and throughout the Appalachian Mountain region, then it's all worth it. So even if it doesn't turn out to be valuable for bats, even if it turns out that we don't learn anything from this, I would say it's still very beneficial for wildlife that hibernate, or for animals that need a place in the winter months to get out. So like black bear, for example. I have learned black bears are not true hibernators, but they do go into some deep sleep in the winter, and they need a place that is safe and warm to do that. That's exactly what my intention is with this. So I realize parents and grandparents might watch this and think, oh my goodness, that's a liability. Some kid's gonna go in there and get hurt. I really try my best to, first of all, make sure no one knows where this is except my sons. So when I mention bringing young people here, I bring my sons here. And we've had enough good talks about safety and the fact that they know their dad used to be a coal miner, and their dad doesn't even go in this thing except for one day with some biologists. I would like to think that taught my sons that this is not a playground. You don't monkey around in there. Is it still dangerous? Yes, it is, but so is the road that's only a few football fields away from us. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a risk I'm willing to take for the possible benefits that are already discussed. So let's talk about what did go on here, because I think that's kind of interesting. Maybe I'll change the camera angle and get you a better shot. We'll talk about the types of mining that went on here. A lot of these lamps would have burned whale blubber. So you would have whale blubber burning in your lamp. That's all the illumination you had. In some cases, they did have candles. Would have been a terrible, terrible job. It really would have. You're choking on the smoke from your oil. You're in cramped quarters. Did you hear the water in there? These particular mines are flooded and about waist deep with water. While you're drilling with your drill and your sledgehammer, you're dealing with dust. In fact, miner's lung, to this day, is still the #1 killer of miners. I told you I was a coal miner. I even in the short time that I worked in a coal mine, I had lung problems. So the dust was absolutely horrible for your lungs. Let's get you one more approach to the mine here. Ready? Here we go. So one last thing I wanted to point out, I have a chalkboard hanging here, and it was not uncommon to find a board like this outside of local mines. And they'd write things up there, for example, no work today. You know, you were not guaranteed a career here. You were not guaranteed steady work. You worked when there was a contract to fill. And so some days you'd show up to work and it would say, no work today, boys. I'm sure when the furnace shut down here in 1850, I'm sure a lot of miners had to decide what they were going to do. They could try and go over the mountain to some of the iron works that are closer into the town of Danville. I bet some of them packed it up and went to the coal region. I bet even others packed up and went west, because that's about the time of the 1840s, the gold rush. So you can just imagine you're sitting around your cabin at night and you're thinking, the mines are closing down here, but I've read in the newspapers about gold they're pulling out of the ground in California. Let's go. And so many Pennsylvania miners ended up going west. And we know that because their diaries tell of that. There's a wonderful diary published in Colorado of a gold miner, silver miner. And the diary was written in Pennsylvania German. Kannst du Deutsch schwätzen? Sprechen Sie Deutsch? Ja, klein bisschen. That means a little. That's all you have to know. If someone says, do you speak Pennsylvania Dutch? Just klein bisschen. Well, let's go for a hike and get you back home. But this is a pretty cool spot. And the hematite is what they were mining here. hematite. Let's see if I can show you a specimen right off the pile here. So again, remember what I said, when you're above the water table, it's like a brownish, soft color. Just some little chunks of it, nothing real big left here. And this real fossiliferous stuff. Can you see the fossils in that rock? That's iron ore. See if we can break it. Wow. It ranges. The iron ores of this area are between 30 and 40% iron. Some have been enriched all the way to 50%. But I'll give you a little view here in just a moment, though. What's amazing is just a few steps into the forest, and you almost lose the mine. It's gone. Really a pretty spot, though. So another thing that would have been a whole nother part of this industry is mine timbers. The mine we just visited was somewhat on the small side, but some of the mines were quite big. I know of one local mine in the town of Danville that was about 400 feet deep as a slope, and then it still had several hundred feet of tunnels from there. And they would have used a tremendous amount of timbers. So that would have been an industry of its own. People who come out and cut these timbers to hold the roof of the mine up. When I was a coal miner, we cut our own. About once a week, take a chainsaw into the woods and my Chevy S10, and we'd fill it with mine timbers. That'd be our timbers for the week. Good day for a walk in the woods. Well, thanks for joining me here today. I'm far from an expert, but I really am an enthusiast. I think our iron heritage is something that is too often overlooked. You can find plenty of enthusiasts that want to talk about the Civil War, about railroads, about whatever it might be. And while those histories are incredibly important, too often I see the story of iron fall between the cracks, whether it's charcoal making, whether it's iron ore mining, or whether it's running the blast furnace. It was such an important part of this region. Hundreds and hundreds of people lived right here on this mountain. And so I like to keep their story alive. Well, the gentleman who taught me a lot of what I know about iron heritage passed away last year. His name was Larry Morden. Larry taught me quite a bit about the miners, the iron workers. And the one thing he always stressed to me, and I'm going to close with this point, he stressed that here locally, many of these Welsh workers, a lot of them were Welsh miners, they were churchgoers. And he used to like to point out that while their work was dirty and their job was messy and dirty and dusty, that their souls and their minds were often as pure as could be. They were good men. And there's many good stories of how on payday, the miners could be heard coming back from town after a shopping trip, using company script, of course, and they'd be singing hymns, praises to God. So Larry Morden and I used to do a mine tour here in Danville, and we always had a tradition. When the tour was over, we'd sing a famous Welsh hymn. So if you'll allow me, here I am in the middle of the woods. I'm going to sing Cumberland. Guide me, O thou great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land. I am weak, but thou art mighty. Hold me with thy powerful hand. Bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. Feed me till I want no more. A little hard to catch your breath when you're walking and singing. But that's the type of sound that would have filled this mountain at quitting time. Miners working their way out of the mines, back these trails, heading back to their families. Families hoping that their loved one made it through another day. Men and boys were killed on a regular basis in these mines, very dangerous. Well, I promised I was going to conclude. Boy, I could talk all day about this stuff. But thank you so much for joining me for a hike. Don't tell anybody about that secret mine I showed you. I want to keep it all to myself and the bears and the bats. Well, I hope to be there in person next year when this pandemic's all over. I'll come down and celebrate your iron heritage with you, if you'll have me. Hope you don't mind a old Pennsylvania coal miner with his banjo. Well, I'm Van Wagner. Nice spending the day with you. Bye-bye.
Hi there, and welcome to Catoctin Mountain Park, a unit of the National Park Service. Ever since the 1930s, the mountain has served a wide variety of purposes for recreators everywhere. But during the 18th and 19th centuries, the mountain served a different purpose, and I'm talking about the charcoal industry. After stopping by the visitor center and driving up Park Central Road for 1 mile, you'll arrive at the Musselman-Vesta parking lot. From here, you'll be able to access the charcoal exhibit trail. This half-mile loop, marked by a pink triangle blaze, will take you through the story of the charcoal industry's history here on the mountain. You'll be able to see interpretive exhibits, such as this wooden sled, and learn how the industry functioned. Now, for example, this wooden sled would be drawn by either horses or mules, and they would bring lumber and timber that's roughly around 4 foot long to various sites across the mountain where you would see charcoal hearths. And this is where the charcoal was burned and created so that it could be brought down to the Catoctin Iron Furnace at the base of the mountain. All across the mountainside, you would find sites like this, a 30 to 40 foot clearing, which would be the area of a charcoal hearth. Now, charcoal hearths would be stacked around with these 4 foot logs into a somewhat pyramidal triangular shape. And this is where you would actually burn the charcoal with a slow cindering fire at the base, which would gradually convert all the wood inside into charcoal itself. If you burned it too quickly, all of the wood would turn into ash and your profit from the charcoal would be wasted. Now, colliers, the people who tended to these charcoal hearths, would normally manage several carts all across the mountainside, and they would walk around to each site to make sure that the fire was maintained at a proper level. And after their rounds, colliers would have to go home. Now, they did not live at the base of the mountain. That was just too much extra effort to go up and down to constantly check on these charcoal hearths. They would have to stay in an area nearby. And this is what they would stay in, a structure called a collier's hut. Very simple wooden structure with 1 room interior, which had room for the collier to sleep and eat, with a stone area in the back to cook his meals. And to say that these are humble living conditions, it's a bit of an understatement. Charcoal that was produced here on the mountain was then brought down to the Catoctin Iron Furnace, where it could be used to help create pig iron. And even though the furnace eventually did close down, the charcoal industry here on the mountain left a very important lasting legacy. So on behalf of the National Park Service, I thank you for joining me today as we took a quick glimpse into the lives of the colliers here at Catoctin Mountain Park. And if you're interested in seeing it for yourself, then I highly encourage you to visit the charcoal exhibit trail for yourself. And if you have any questions, be sure to ask a ranger. We'd be happy to help you.
Hello, friends of Catoctin Furnace. My name is Tim Rose. I'm a geologist and materials scientist in the Department of Mineral Sciences at the Smithsonian Institution, where I manage the analytical laboratories. My interest in Catoctin Furnace goes back to my youth, when we would always ask my parents to stop by the furnace when we were anywhere nearby. This talk is going to include some history, some geology, a discussion how an 18th century iron furnace worked, and finally, what chemical analyses of the raw materials and products of the furnace could tell us about how the local iron ore formed and about a person whose life was spent working there. My current interest in the raw materials and products of the furnace came about when I was approached by my museum colleagues, Kari Brulheid and Doug Owsley from the Department of Anthropology. They told me about their involvement in the study of the remains of people excavated from the cemetery near Catoctin Furnace because of a road widening project in the 1970s. 35 individual burials of people of African and African American descent were excavated and their remains studied in depth. Part of their study included the analysis of bones for mercury, arsenic, zinc, and lead. One analysis for zinc stood out at nearly 1,200 parts per million, many times the average of the others. Who was this person and where did his body absorb the zinc from? I was asked if our analytical facilities and know-how could help shed light on this story. So here's what we know about this person. It could be determined that the extraordinary zinc analysis came from a gentleman who was a slave of African descent who died at the age of 40 or 50. He lived in the late 18th or early 19th century and most likely worked in support of the iron furnace in some capacity. But can we identify where the zinc came from that was absorbed in his body? And can we determine how that may have happened? First, let's get to know the regional geology a bit. Here's a geologic map of Frederick County, Maryland. It shows 4 major geologic regions, and they are from west to east, the Blue Ridge Province, the Mesozoic-aged Gettysburg Basin where dinosaurs left their footprints, the limestones of the Frederick Valley, and on the far east, the Piedmont. The black rectangle in the area around Catoctin Furnace. So let's have a closer look there. On this map, you see the approximate locations of the older Furnace and Auburn ore banks to the west and south of the furnace, and a much larger upper ore bank to the north. What you'll notice is that the ore banks are situated very near the contact of the rocks of the Blue Ridge Province to the west, represented by the brown and pink colors, and the low-lying rocks of the Mesozoic Basin to the east. If you were able to look at a cross-section of the Earth where the yellow line at the bottom of the image is, these are the relationships that you would see. Notice that the contact between the Blue Ridge and Mesozoic Basin is marked by the Bull Run Mountain Fault, where rocks of the Mesozoic Basin have dropped downward relative to the Blue Ridge rocks on the west. Rocks found along faults like this tend to be broken into fragments, forming a rock texture we call a breccia. It is along this contact of brecciated rocks that we find the Catoctin Furnace ore deposits. Now let's take an even closer look at the ore deposits. This is a map of the upper ore bank published by Joseph T. Sinjewald in 1909 from his Johns Hopkins University dissertation study, The Iron Ores of Maryland. Later in 1943, he became the state geologist and director of the Maryland Geological Survey. What I've done here is I've taken his sketch map of the upper ore bank and added geology based on his written observations and adding modern geologic interpretation. The blue dashed line shows the approximate position of the contact between the phyllite of the Harper's Formation and the ore deposit. This was recently verified by Joe Clemens on a visit to the mine. You can also see a belt of limestone between the Bull Run Mountain Fault and the eastern side of the ore body. This is a softball-sized sample of ore from the Auburn mine bank. Cutting it open revealed the hollow inside lined with the iron oxide mineral goethite. And here's another sample, also from Auburn. Once again, it's hollow, and the interesting feature the arrow is pointing to is probably a cast from a fossil in the now dissolved away limestone. This, along with field relationships of the rocks, tells us that limestone was involved in the formation of the ore. Here's a closer look at that previous sample. You can see the fossil in the upper right and the typical sort of ball shapes that goethite forms as it grows. Here's an older picture from 1936 of the Isabella stack. So exactly how did they make iron metal from iron oxide ore in a thing like this? Here's a rapid fire explanation. First, find an iron ore deposit and buy the land all around it. Then find limestone as nearby as you can to use for the flux. Build a proper stack out of the right kinds of stone. Have the colliers cut down the forest for miles in all directions and make the timber into charcoal. Manage the forest so you can keep it going. Build a bellows and use water power if you have it, which they did at Catoctin Furnace by diverting Little Hunting Creek. Transport the ore, limestone, and charcoal to the stack and load the proper amounts into the top of the stack and ignite it. Blow lots of air into the side of the stack for some time and make it really hot to melt the stuff inside. Open the upper gate on the lower side of the stack and let the liquid slag, the leftover stuff, flow out. And open the lower gate and let the liquid iron flow into molds on the casting floor. Close it all up and dump more of the 3 ingredients in the top and do it over and over. After some time, which could be months, blow out the furnace and clean out the inside. So, in a nutshell, iron ore, limestone, and charcoal plus heat and air becomes liquid iron, liquid slag, a whole bunch of fumes, and maybe a deposit of cadmia. What on earth is cadmia and how does it form? Here's a diagram of an iron furnace in operation. We can see the inside of it here in this kind of cartoon. We see our gentleman of interest working down on the casting floor, as well as up on the top, where he would be carefully loading the required amounts of ore, limestone, and charcoal into the top of the stack. If there were small amounts of zinc in any of these ingredients, the zinc will form a vapor down in the burning part of the furnace, and the vapor will move upward in the stack where it will oxidize and condense on the cooler walls of the upper stack. It was documented at another iron furnace that a 6-month run of ore containing just 0.6% zinc built a deposit of 25 tons of zinc oxide on the inside of the furnace. There's at least one mention in the literature about a zinc oxide buildup at Catoctin Furnace. Back in the day, they called this zinc oxide deposit cadmia. Today, we know it as the mineral zincite. These are beautiful crystals of zincite that formed in an iron furnace in Poland. They became very popular with mineral collectors until it was revealed they weren't natural. They're still pretty valuable. And here's some natural examples of zincite. So back to our question about the origin of zinc in the bones of our gentleman of interest. In order to answer this, we decided to analyze the raw materials used and, for completeness, the products as well. Dr. Elizabeth Comer obtained permits and permission to collect samples from the area, and most of the samples were collected and carefully documented by Joseph Clemens. Here's one of those samples shown on a centimeter square grid. It is an iron metal blob that formed probably as a mold overflow on the casting floor. The bottom side, on the lower part of the image of the sample, has pieces of charcoal and slag stuck to it. In spite of the surface rust, the iron metal inside is still fresh. In order to analyze these materials, we mounted small chips of the different materials in epoxy and gave them a highly polished surface. The samples were then put in our analytical scanning electron microscope that you can see here. In a matter of seconds, we can have a quantitative analytical result that tells us what elements and how much are in that particular sample. First, we investigated the iron ore. this backscattered electron image is just 1/10 of a millimeter across. Right away, we see the ore is very impure. There are abundant grains of quartz, muscovite mica, and in this field of view, a monazite crystal, all surrounded by the iron oxide mineral goethite. The likely source of these impurities is the adjacent phyllite of the Harper's Formation, which is full of mica and quartz and probably monazite as well. This is supported recently by ore fragments containing fragments of phyllite that we observed in recent field work. Clearly, the phyllite was involved in the ore forming process. Here are two beautiful, highly magnified images of more pure ore showing the growth layering of the goethite. And here are the analyses. And what you see is that the Auburn and Furnace ore banks both contain small amounts of zinc in the goethite. But the upper mine bank has little or none. So we found a source of the zinc, but for completeness, we need to check the other raw materials as well. These are images of limestone made of calcium carbonate and its magnesium-bearing rock cousin, dolomite. The sample on the left is comprised mostly of calcium carbonate, specifically the mineral calcite, with darker patches of the magnesium-containing mineral dolomite and tiny bright calcium phosphate crystals, which are the mineral apatite. I know this is a bit confusing because we have in geology both a rock name and a mineral name called dolomite. On the right side are shown some submicron sized crystals of an iron sulfide, likely the mineral pyrite. None of the limestone and dolomite samples contained detectable zinc. The third raw material is charcoal, which is, of course, made from local wood. Some trees are known to sequester minerals in their tissue, so it isn't too far-fetched to consider checking it for zinc. We were able to analyze charcoal from the sample I showed before and period wood samples from one of the buildings at Catoctin Furnace. The top two images are the wood and the lower are the charcoal, all showing plant cell structure. Again, we found no detectable zinc. So while we're at it, why not analyze the furnace products as well? The iron metal shown here in the upper half of the left-hand image, it is the clean iron metal with graphite, the little black stringy things, carbon that is. And this lower portion of the image is oxidized. So this is iron oxide that formed from the oxidation of the metal that was produced at the furnace. On the right-hand side, we can see this additional layer on the bottom, and that is the rusty material that formed on the outside of this piece of metal that sat around in soil, perhaps for well over a century. Again, there's no zinc, and we wouldn't expect it because, as we talked about earlier, the zinc tends to vaporize and go up the stack away from where the iron metal is accumulating in the bottom of the stack. And the other product of the furnace, of course, is that slag, that waste material. This is the leftover material from the limestone or dolomite and the impurities from the ore. These are primarily calcium, magnesium, and silicon. Together, these solidify into a glass, often with trapped gas bubbles. Although this material cools relatively rapidly after it flows out of the furnace, we can see there was some time for some crystals to grow. What's really cool is that some of these crystals show the same features that we see in rapidly cooled volcanic rocks. In the image in the upper left, you can see one of these trapped gas bubbles, and it's decorated on the inside with iron metal little beads. The glassy slag compositions turned out to be quite variable. None contained any zinc that we could detect, but some had significant amounts of sulfur. And what's really interesting is I knew that because when we chipped off little pieces to mount and analyze, you could smell the sulfur as the little chips came off of the samples. So in the course of this study, we've shed some light on how the ore deposits of the Catoctin Furnace area formed, but we still have a ways to go to fully understand that. We've also learned about the probable source of the zinc that our gentleman of interest absorbed into his body. We know there were zinc fumes going up the furnace stack, and a person like him working at the top, loading ore, limestone, and charcoal, likely would have been exposed to those fumes. We can also say something about the time that our gentleman of interest lived. It had to be in the time when the zinc-bearing Auburn and Furnace ore banks were being worked, because the ore from the upper bank contained no zinc, and it opened in the mid-1800s, considerably later. This just helps to corroborate what the archaeologists already knew. So I hope you enjoyed hearing this story. I'm sure that down the road, we'll be able to add some more to it, and I'll be happy to share that when the time comes.
Oh, the night was clear, and the stars were shining, and the moon come up, so quiet in the sky. All the people gathered round, and the band was tuning. I can hear them now, playing Coming Through the Rye. You were dressed in blue, and you looked so lovely, a gentle flower of a small town girl. You took my hand, and we stepped to the music in a single smile. You became my world, and we danced all night to the fiddle and the banjo. Their drifting tunes seem to fill the air. So long ago, but I still remember when we fell in love at the Roseville Fair. And we courted dearly. We'd rock for hours with the front porch chair. Then a year went by from the time that I met you, and I made you mine at the Roseville Fair. And we danced all night
Hello friends, I'm Bill Curtis. I'm a park ranger at Hampton National Historic Site, and I'm glad to be with you today. Right now we're standing on the north portico of Hampton Mansion. That was finished in 1790, and it was the biggest house in the United States when it was finished. It was the home of the Ridgely family, and the biggest source of the Ridgely family's wealth came from an iron furnace called Northampton Iron Furnace. They built that furnace just about a mile north of us from where we're standing today. It was the Northampton Iron Furnace. It went into blast in 1760, and it stayed in blast till 1829. The iron furnace sits on Peterson's Run, which is a tributary of the Gunpowder River. Today it's all in the Loch Raven watershed, and only foundations and small ruins can be found if you know where to look. Right now we're looking out one of the windows on the third floor of the Hampton Mansion. And if we had looked out in this view in, say, 1880, there would have been almost no trees visible. The iron furnace itself went through about an acre of trees a day when it was in blast. And fences and cooking fires and other things took so much wood that there was very little wood left on the east coast of the US by 1900. And all of these forests only grew back in the 20th century. The iron furnace needed natural resources to work. It needed water and timber and iron ore, limestone, and most importantly, people. We'll talk about the people in another minute. Here you can see the basic product that the Northampton Iron Furnace produced, and that is cast iron. It was cast in these bars, and if you look closely, you can see that they were all labeled N. Hampton Company, and those bars were then shipped to factories in England and elsewhere in the US to be turned into finished goods. The furnace could also produce cast items like this fireback that you can see with the intricate decorations and the word Northampton written across the top. That was actually used in the Hampton Mansion for many years, and you can see if you look at the bottom right corner of it that it was in use for so long that the fire actually damaged it, so it was removed. And we found it in one of the outbuildings on the estate. The iron furnace was especially profitable during the American Revolution. The Ridgeleys made cannons and cannonballs and camp kettles and other things for the Continental Army. This was found on the site of the furnace. It's a wrecked piece of cannon barrel. They used to check cannon barrels by putting an extra charge of gunpowder in them and a very long fuse, and they would light the fuse and run. And if the cannon didn't blow up, it was okay. And if it did blow up, it didn't pass inspection. In 1780, very sadly, a Captain Fulford of the Continental Artillery was killed in one of these cannon explosions in one of the tests. We owe Captain Fulford a debt because he volunteered to serve in the Army to serve the cause of the American Revolution. Hundreds of other workers had no choice. They were forced to work at the iron furnace, indentured servants and enslaved people. Work at the iron furnace was brutal. It was backbreaking, it was hard, and it was dangerous. Here we have an 1829 inventory of the enslaved people held at Hampton. It indicates that there were 32 people held in bondage in 1829. We don't know a great deal about their lives, sadly, but one source of information we have is runaway advertisements. Many people sought their freedom from the iron furnace. Most of them went north. The furnace was just about 25 miles south of the Pennsylvania state line. We have two of those advertisements, one for a woman named Pug and it describes her, and it includes the fact that she has lost her left thumb. It doesn't say how, but probably that was some sort of industrial accident at the iron furnace. And likewise, there's a man named Jem who sought his freedom, and he's also described, and he was described as having a rupture, which was certainly due to the hard work he was forced to do at the furnace. Behind me, you can see two of the slave quarters that are still standing on the estate. About 32 enslaved people were forced to work at the Northampton Iron Works. Their work was hard, hot, dangerous, overall brutal. So the Northampton Iron Furnace was a significant piece of Maryland history and American history. It's a place where Africans became African Americans. It's a place where American culture and identity developed. It's a place where American architectural style developed, as we can see in the Hampton Mansion. It was great to have you with us here today, and sometime I look forward to meeting you all in person at the next festival. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, my name is Joe Clemens, and I'm an archaeologist with EAC Archaeology, and I'm standing here today on a very distinct and noticeable scar of industrial landscape here at Catoctin Furnace. As you can see behind me, the exposed rock in this open pit mine is really a stark reminder of just how much activity was going on in the area that surrounds what we understand as the furnace today in town. It's important to note that at the time period that the furnace was in operation, thousands upon thousands of acres were undergoing this industrialized cultural process. Charcoal was being created. There was a network of roads that ran throughout the mountain to transport raw materials such as charcoal and the iron ore to the furnace. And the hills would have been alive with laborers all working various tasks to help produce the raw materials necessary to create the product. And so we're standing here at the edge of this iron mine today to think about how that landscape existed at the time and how we draw these artificial boundaries in our mind, in our perception today. If you were to visit the park, it's very easy to walk the trails of the park and see it as an idyllic forested landscape. But it's important to understand just how interconnected the areas that you walk in were to the furnace itself down at the village. It's very important to understand that things like Route 15 didn't exist and didn't divide the town from this incredibly resource-rich area just next to it that was part of the community. This area around me, with the mine and the collier pits just off to my west here upslope, would have been a particularly bustling area filled with laborers, not only working at the mine and collaring, but also cultivating the small field which was existing just behind the camera as well. And one of the evidences that we have of this labor that was working up here and living up here on the mountain outside of the village is a small stone foundation just off to my west, which was found using a synthesis of ethnography, oral histories, hand-drawn maps, and modern LiDAR imagery to peer beneath the tree cover and look for things such as collier pits, foundations, and roads. So we'll walk over to the house foundation here and we'll talk a little bit more about how these things play a part in interpreting the greater cultural landscape. So I'm standing here at the corner of a building foundation that you can see through the brush, which came of interest to our investigation through a hand-drawn map that was part of an ethnographic research known as the Renner map. This map was constructed by an individual who was alive at the time of the furnace operation, and listed several buildings up here on the mountain landscape. Now, the close proximity of this building to the iron mine, which I was just speaking at, the field which lies between the mine and the structure here, the charcoal road just to my right, the collier pits up on the hill, and importantly, a freshwater spring just behind the camera, really serves as a good mark of the interconnectivity of all of these dispersed labor activities that are going up here on the mountain. And it really serves as a way to not only house people, but also as a focal point for all of the different types of labor to gather the resources that go into creating the iron product down in the village below, and serves to illustrate just how connected this environment was to the production of the ore, the production of the iron that's going on down in the town. So I'm standing here in one of the open pit mines, one of the central mines that's located on Catoctin Mountain here at Catoctin Furnace, to talk a little bit about our ongoing efforts to study and analyze the raw materials, in this case specifically iron ore, that were associated with the Catoctin Iron Furnace and the production of iron. And so what we're doing is, in conjunction with the Smithsonian Institution and Tim Rose, we are using X-ray fluorescence to look at the various natural resources that go into iron making, such as the iron ore, and creating a database with partnership from other iron furnaces in the surrounding landscapes of Maryland and Pennsylvania to gain a better understanding about the composition of various ores in the area and the finished iron products that the ores help create. Using modern technologies such as LiDAR in combination with previously done ethnographic research and research done in partnership with organizations such as Cunningham Falls State Park and Catoctin Mountain Park, as well as Catoctin Furnace Historical Society and other local enterprises and interested parties, we're able to better piece together the greater fabric of the cultural landscape here at Catoctin and really understand how things that are kind of outside of our typical perception of an industrial landscape all fit into the fabric of Catoctin Furnace.
Hi there, I'm Rob Wanner from EAC Archaeology, and I'm here today on this lovely day at Cunningham Falls State Park in Thurmont, Maryland. This park, most of this park, along with areas to the north, including Thurmont Watershed and Catoctin Mountain Forest, as well as areas to the south, including most of Frederick Municipal Forest, were part of Catoctin Furnace property historically. We believe that at the height of its operations, Catoctin Furnace owned approximately 11,000 acres. Only 1/10 of that was devoted to mining and processing the raw materials and housing the workers. The rest of it was devoted to charcoal production, the production of charcoal, rather, which was the sole fuel source for the Catoctin Furnace for the first 150 years of its existence. This landscape, full of rocky and acidic soils and sloping terrain, would have looked very different 150 years ago. However, there are still some traces if you know where to look. Behind me, you'll notice a large circular pit sunken into the ground. The bottom is relatively flat, as contrasting with the sloping terrain on either side of it. This is a monument to the industrial productivity of this area. Charcoal workers, or colliers, would have used this as a hearth site, a charcoal hearth or a collier pit. And it's inconspicuous. If you're hiking on a trail here, you may walk right past it without noticing it. So this charcoal hearth is approximately 30 to 40 feet in diameter. It's manually raked and leveled. And historically, colliers would create a wooden chimney and then stack vertical logs in concentric rings around that chimney. These logs would have been cut by woodcutters the previous winter. At that point, the collier would cover the mound with leaves and earth to create an oxygen-starved atmosphere. Hot embers would be dropped into the chimney, and a smoldering fire would be created. This fire would burn for approximately 2 weeks, and as the logs fell into the fire, it converted them to charcoal with the oxygen starved atmosphere rather than woody ash dust, which is created in your standard campfire. Occasionally, colliers would need to climb on top of the stack and stir the embers up with a long stick. We know how dangerous this work was because we have several newspaper accounts of colliers climbing on top and actually falling in. So after 2 weeks and a period of cooling, the charcoal would be raked into mounds, and then it would be put into bushels and then put into a cart that was drawn by mules and transported down to the furnace. And these roads that were used for this transportation are actually also still visible today. We're right next to one, and the colliers' pits actually tend to be on one side of the road, probably to facilitate the loading. So we'll walk along one of those roads right now. So here we are along one of these charcoal roads. So we know that during the height of operations, Catoctin Furnace was producing approximately 1,000 tons of pig iron per year. That's between the years of 1831 and 1856. So studies have shown that an acre of woodland such as this can produce the fuel to produce approximately 4 to 6 tons of pig iron per year. So the level of wood cutting and burning in these woods in 150 years ago must have been massive, extraordinary. Nevertheless, some form of sustained forest management must have been practiced, or the forest would have been completely denuded. So that means that as stands of wood were being cut, they were likely regenerated. We know from archaeological surveys in Catoctin Mountain National Park to the north of here that charcoal activity, the evidence of charcoaling activity was focused in stands of white oak, hemlock, birch, and tulip poplar. And to my left is another charcoal hearth. We're approximately 400 feet to the west of the previous one, which is within a stand of white oak. So as you can see, this collier pit on a slope is focused in a stand of white oak. There's several fallen trees here that are all white oak, and you might notice this one of smaller diameter that is broken along here. This would have been the size that was preferred for colliery. One's logs of consistent diameter that are just slightly smaller. So what do we know about the lives of colliers? We know that for much of the year it was very difficult, very solitary work. They'd spend several months out here working in shifts in essentially log huts covered with mud, and these were frequently visited by visitors of the slithering variety, such as rattlesnakes and copperheads. We know from records that at least one enslaved individual did colliery here at Catoctin Mountains. His name was Sam. So we know that colliery was not exclusively practiced by free laborers. We also know the name of one free laborer who in 1871 unfortunately had a little mishap up here while he was collierying, and a fire consumed his coat, $250 in fractional currency, and approximately $500 to $600 worth of lumber. And speaking of fires, we know of several forest fires that took place here, mainly over the course of the 1870s. In 1871, 1872, and 1879, high winds basically blew some embers from charcoal hearths and spread it to the woods and acres of woodland, along with property and houses, were consumed. There was a particularly destructive fire in 1875, May of 1875 to be precise, which consumed approximately 2,000 acres of Catoctin property. So the landscape 150 years ago would have been very different here. We would have had roads, charcoal pits, colliers' huts, and endless traffic coming up and down the mountain to move the charcoal to Catoctin Furnace. How do we get at that historic landscape? Well, if we're walking around with a measuring tape, as we're doing today, that would take years to map in all of these features. So what's much better to do is to utilize imagery that's produced using a technology called light detection and ranging, or LiDAR. In airborne LiDAR, what happens is a device is mounted on an aerial vehicle, which essentially bombards the surface of the Earth with lasers, harmless ones. The device measures the time it takes for the light to be reflected back. And the sheer density of points that's created is able to penetrate the very dense tree canopy in a wooded area such as this, so that we're able to see the surface. We call this a bare earth surface model. So we can look over 11,000 acres of wooded area and be able to detect all these features on the surface, such as colliers' pits and charcoal roads. Using this analysis, we've mapped in over 1,000 charcoal hearths in this area. And as we're working through this analysis, which has very large implications for the historic landscape, local ecology, and labor at Catoctin Furnace, we hope that if you visit this place, that you take a moment to reflect on how these very small, inconspicuous, but important monuments have shaped the present landscape. Thanks for your time. Oral history and oral traditions, as well as using all of these important techniques like utilizing LiDAR data and spatial data, things like that.
Absolutely. I mean, the bottom line is the people, the most important thing. And speaking of the people, one thing that we have learned is that in Africa, collaring was sometimes a women's work undertaking. It's very much a tending process. Is there any evidence yet at Catoctin that women were involved with the collaring?
I don't know of any. We are relying very much on very minimal evidence at this point. We are still researching a lot of things, but every instance that I know of a collier being mentioned by name at Catoctin Furnace or in the vicinity, it's always been males, enslaved, or free laborers. So we are continuing to pursue this, but I don't know of any evidence at this point. So
right, and the women, I'm going to just point out that the women were probably there, but just weren't, aren't visible in the written record. We have a question about the role that archival research plays in our work.
So yeah, I mean, our archival research is one of the most important aspects, I think, of one of the first steps that we have to do before we even go into the field. Some of the archival research that we have even just recently uncovered, this huge stash of maps that Elizabeth has actually located. Apparently, people knew it was there, but we didn't know how useful it was. And so, now we have a better handle on people who lived there prior to the sale of the lands to the Park Service in the north and the state, in Cunningham Falls State Park. Vegetative landscape, the trees, what kind of trees were there in the early 20th century as opposed to now. So that's been a huge important thing. I think Elizabeth could probably speak more to the other avenues that we're taking besides the map research.
Well, just very quickly, I will mention that we are taking a deep dive into a heretofore untapped resource in the Moravian diaries and letters that are showing us day-to-day operations of the furnace and really providing very specific information about the enslaved population and the ways in which they moved through the landscape. So we're very excited about that research coming out of the old German diaries. Joe, I have a quick question that just popped up for you. You have been, for some years, working on a deep dive into XRF research. Can you describe sort of that, process and how it's going?
Well, the best deep dive on that process will probably be Tim Rose. He has far more experience in working with that than I do. But over the years, we have managed to get quite the collection of XRF information, not only from our own samples that we were able to use the Bruker system on, but also in cooperating with the Smithsonian and finding samples for them. So hopefully, I think in the big picture, a lot of what we're finding is we're actually just corroborating things that were found, as Tim mentioned from Joseph Singlewald, really just an amazing geologist, especially at the time frame with the tools that he had, was amazingly accurate. So hopefully we're going to use this process to kind of run down and discover just even more about the interrelationships of the iron furnaces and the geologic nature of the iron beds themselves.
It's an ongoing process. And I think that's one of the most interesting aspects is it really does. The archaeological discovery changes literally every day as new things come to fore. And the XRF is just one of those examples. We have a question and, we can take a quick, each of us. What is the coolest thing that you have found out at Catoctin or about Catoctin? And Rob, why don't you hit that first?
We get that question a lot in archaeologists in general. And, far from being kind of a Sutton Hoo type, discovery, we tend to find, a really cool feature or something that's very informative. And when you tell somebody, I found a shoe that was partially made, they're like, what? But it is really cool. So I will say a number of years ago, we were working at the forgeman's house. And we recovered approximately 30,000 artifacts there. One of the coolest finds, I think, and again, we find horseshoes everywhere, but we found a horseshoe embedded in a window facing inward. And we also found a second horseshoe underneath the floorboards next to the fireplace. And I think there's no accident there. It seems to me, definitely in the case of the window, but next to the fireplace, I think it was a very deliberate placement, apotropaic or, kind of household magic. So I think that's very interesting. So,
how about you, Joe?
I think my favorite was the discovery of the foundation that I was filmed in front of. Right next to Gum Spring. It was really one of those moments that you look for in archaeology where you don't just find something, but you link two pieces of information together. And that was very much linking the Renner map and the location of this boarding house that's supposed to be log and split into two pieces right next to a spring. And then you follow the spring valley up, you find the road, you find the foundation. It's right like they say it is. And it was just a great moment.
Oh, that's great. And my answer changes every day because we're always, but the clothing or the gravestones at the African-American cemetery, seeing those and being able to to know what they are. So thank you, everybody. I think our time is up. We could talk for hours, but we really appreciate your time today, sharing your discoveries at Catoctin Furnace with the audience. So just keep digging and let us know what you find next.
This video is dedicated to the enslaved Africans of Catoctin Furnace. Catoctin Furnace represents in microcosm the American Industrial Revolution. From 1776 to 1903, iron companies cast both raw pig iron and iron implements, and the furnace site grew into an industrial complex. At least 271 enslaved people of African ancestry worked at Catoctin Furnace between the 1770s and the 1840s, and many were buried in the African American cemetery. In the 1970s, highway construction and associated archaeological investigations restored attention to the 200-plus-year-old burial ground. The Catoctin Furnace Historical Society, founded in 1973, continues to commemorate, preserve, and interpret the diverse history of the village. Catoctin SlaveSpeak is a collection of narrative poems written in the voice of enslaved Africans who were imported to work at the furnace. They are based on available archaeological and forensic anthropological evidence resulting from the studies conducted on behalf of the Catoctin Furnace Historical Society. They also draw on general knowledge of the peculiar institution of slavery in the United States of America and throughout the African diaspora. They are the result of many hours of walking the earth, visiting the cemetery, studying the history, quiet listening, intuitive knowing, and creative writing by the author Elayne Bond Hyman. The poem gives voice to heretofore voiceless, often ignored, and uncredited segment of Maryland's historic population. The Catoctin Furnace Historical Society believes that the poem's availability in video form will enrich the experience of viewers' interest in learning the full story of the Catoctin Iron Furnace. It is hoped that this poetic, artistic, and emotional enrichment can foster a changed conversation about those upon whose backs the foundation of the state of Maryland's rests.
For hundreds of years, the dead bodies of enslaved Africans who lived and worked at Catoctin Furnace were hidden in plain sight. Though buried on land set aside as a cemetery, no one visits their graves. No flowers are laid. No honoring songs are sung by their generations. Yet there are those who stand by as witnesses. Embedded in the rocks, the creeks, the grasses, and the trees, the memories of them reside, a people long lost. This is their testimony. We've stood here for quite a while. Through slave bodies we've grown, weathering storms of snow and ice, while furnace ash blasted down. Our bark grows rough and tough. Soft slave skin lines our trunks. We shelter skeletal manes. Work east face is enough. We felt men bring slave bodies up, toss them at our roots. Their pinch-toed coffin we split wide, their shrouds we have devoured. Their skin flakes off, dark black, light brown, layering this mud-soaked ground that feeds our brambled grove. Slave bodies twisted, tangled in the dirt we hold in place. The air once fouled with iron ore, a burned up, burning space. The hills lay bare for charcoal fire, old growth passed out of sight. We heard their sorrow songs moaned in the dark of night. The cry of infants dead, slave mothers mourned alive. Lungs struck black with lash and whip, slave bones crunched with iron chains. Slave marrow feeds us now. Slave tears pullied up our trunks, commingled with the rain. We stand here, live witnesses, sentient to slave pain, while gravestones hide and peek. When harsh wind blows upon our heads, tearing at our limbs, or sun sucks dry small woodland creeks, wastewater's precious drops, we come together, branching up, join hands in silent hymns. We sway toward one another, supported by the songs. Slave voices whisper from below and steady us along. For even in our shadowed grove, slave bodies reach toward life. The records of Catoctin Furnace reveal the existence of at least 271 souls who were owned and worked as enslaved persons. They worked in the furnace and surrounding village, without pay, without recognition, without ceasing. They were considered property. Recognizing them as human beings, we restore their humanity whenever we speak their names. This poem exists to do that work. Property. Something owned or possessed, worked, rented out, sold, used as business collateral, given away. Black bones laying in a ditch 200 years unattended, waiting, waiting, waiting. In death, they're property, unclaimed, unvisited, unknown, deflowered in unmarked graves. Owned, lock, stock, and barrel, guns pointed at their heads. Trigger-happy neighbors waiting, waiting, waiting. Stones cry out, black bones rattle, roll, the call of their names. George, George, Harrison, Henry, Harry, Isaac, Leonard, Lucky, Lucy, Peter, Sari, Stacy, Wally, Sarah, Leonard, Jeremiah, Henry, Peter, Nathaniel, Ruth. Whites own their eyes, blinded them. Jack, James, Millie, Phil, Ben, Nellie, Sam, John, Thomas, John, Clemens, Jenny, Polly, Rachel, Katie, Samuel, Hercules. Whites own their lips, muzzled them. Clemens, Maria, Petty, Sammy, Susanna, Allie, Ann, Ben, Betty, Big Dick, Bill, Katie, Charlotte, Christina, Chloe, Esther, Elsie. Whites on their hands, manacled them. Farm Jacob, Frederick, George, Harriet, Harry, Harvey, Henry, Hetty, Humbert, Jack, Jacob, Jane, Janie, Joe, Larkin, Len, Lewis, Liddy. Whites on their feet, shackled them. Little Bill, Locke, Lorena, Lucinda, Magdalene, Mary, Maria, Mary, Mattie, Mill, Millie, Mingo, Nanny, Ned, Nell, old Hannah, old Will, Paris, Pris. Whites on their flesh branded them. Reese, Romeo, Rose, Sal, Sammy, Sam, Samuel, Sue, Toby, Wally, Will, Hanson, Big Bill, Daniel, Isaac, John, William of Elizabeth. Whites owned their vaginas, raped them. Lucy, Jane, Caroline, Georgiana, Emily, Anise, Sarah, Mary, Ellen, Mary, Meredith, Bessie, Anne, Anna, Mary, Carlisle. Whites on their necks hung them. Andrew, Julia, Lucy, Mary, Peter, Sarah, Sylvester, Andrew, Eliza, John, Joseph, Mary, William, Martha, Philip, Sarah, Henry, Elizabeth, Hezekiah, John, Nathan, Otho, Sarah, Susan, Anne, Isaac, John, Julia, Nick, Peter, Sarah, Simon. Whites on their packs broke them. Jacob, Moses, Nicholas, Richard, Mary, Daniel, Anne, Anthony, Richard, James, Patsy, Nace, Rachel, Anne, Bill, Bob, Charity, Christiana, David, Eliza. Who owns the owner's property? Unknown. 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 Polly, Richard, William, Priscilla, Phoebe, George, Jesse, Thomas, James, Richard Jr., Thomas, Henry, Benjamin. Unknown. Much has been made of the life and heroic work of Harriet Tubman, a Maryland woman who escaped slavery and bravely came back to rescue at least 70 people and gave instructions for escape for dozens more. Less well known are the lives of those Maryland women, men, and children who did not escape, but lived out their days in slavery. Many lived and worked at Catoctin Furnace. Here, the work which occupied both Africans and Europeans was focused on making iron. It had many uses. It's possible that manacles and leg irons to prevent escape and punish those who tried were forged here. This poem is dedicated to those whose only escape was death. Ain't how it says you tired? Keep going. Is you scared? Keep going. Is you hungry? Keep going. Is you want to taste freedom? Keep going. I don't know nothing about no freedom. I was born and bred to work. Born over in there in them hills. My mama laid down one day from her work. Lay down with me in her belly. When she got up to finish her work, I'd been done come out her belly. And that was work. She done her work with me, hanging on tight to her back or onto her tits, me curled round her belly. And that was work. My mama buried in them hills. She about worked to death. They took me from her. When her belly swelled up again, there was another baby in there trying to get out. That one didn't make it. Still hear my mama groaning in the middle of the night, see her bleeding real bad too. Said she couldn't get that baby out. They both screamed themselves to death. And all of a sudden, not a peep, not a whimper. Woods got still and quiet like I were laying close up to my sister and we was trying not to cry. Next thing I know, they told me my mama dead. Didn't know nothing about no dead. Dead mean no more sound. No more smiles at me when she see me coming up the path with a cup of water for her refreshment. Dead mean no belly to curl up against on a cold night when the wind is beating on them trees, knocking off them leaves, making them twirl and tumble to the ground. Dead mean when them pine trees scratch and whistle, talking to theyselves, ain't nobody care what they has to say. Dead mean them rocks got stuck over top my mama's head. They be jammed into the dirt where her body got throwed. Dead mean I ain't never, ever, never hear nobody call me baby no more. Dead mean I ain't got no name but gal. Gal this and gal that. Now I knows about work too. I knows about iron work. I ain't one to pull it out them mountains. I ain't one to take it and throw it in them red hot coals. I ain't one to stand in that heat and that hard. I the one stand over the wash tub, scrubbing and rubbing they clothes, beating out the black and the soot, fetched gal, lifted gal. I the one making they soap out of lye. I the one with burnt fingers. I the one with skin pearled away, muscles torn and shredded from they bones. I the one grabbing they buckets and filling them up, watching that water turn gray, running blood red, bleaching with bluing. I the one scrub it, gal, on your knees, gal. I the one trying to please them. Get up, gal. Get down, gal. Can't make them happy no how. Come here, gal. Go there, gal. I the one try to please myself. Watch it, gal. Don't sass me, gal. I the one try running away. I'll whoop you, gal. Made it down that road past that barn, same road my papa ran down when I was young. Never did see him no more. I the one they caught. I the one that branded with that iron. I the one wore shackles around my feet. I the one ankle bleeding where that iron cut my leg. Walking back and forth, hanging up they clothes in they yard. I the one hitting the head and beat on the back. I the one cut on the hand and slap on the face. I that one. Commander of the Confederate Army, General Lee, surrendered to the commanding general of the United States Army, General Grant, on April 9, 1865. This surrender marked the beginning of the end of the Civil War. That end was officially declared by President Johnson, August 1866. The state of Maryland sent its soldiers to fight on the Union side. So at the end of the war, during a period of Reconstruction, came the promise of 40 acres and a mule to those who had toiled while enslaved without pay or property to call their own. That promise has yet to be fulfilled. The state of Maryland owes a debt yet to be honored to all of those upon whose backs and by whose labor the state was founded. This poem is dedicated to Reconstruction's promise of reparation. This garden howls for sunlight, sitting as it does on raised box soil, spring planted by those who fancy days gone by. This garden remembers the murmurs and the moans of bones long buried but unboxed in its blood-soaked soil. This garden seeks the reign of an idyllic past, one that never happened or is yet to be. This garden is a scream, a cry, a longing, a begging of its dirt to note the day and date and time when brittle dried up bones will walk and talk their tales for recompense of 40 acres and 1 mule.
Do not hasten to bid me adieu. cowboy whose love you so true.
Welcome to Cornwall Iron Furnace. My name is Mike Emery. I'm the site administrator here at the museum, and I'm going to take you on a short tour. Cornwall is primarily known for two things. One, for its surviving architecture. This is the most intact of all of the cold blast iron furnaces in North America. And its Gothic revival style also makes it rather unique in many of the furnaces that were built in the region. It's also known for its deposit of iron ore. This was the largest regional deposit of iron ore and served as an active mine from the late 1730s up until its closure in 1973. Upon its closure, over 106 million tons of iron ore were removed from the Cornwall mine and fed not only the 4 furnaces that existed here at Cornwall, but also furnaces in Lebanon, in this part of Pennsylvania, and beyond. Currently, we're inside the charging room. This was the first place that the raw materials used to make iron at Cornwall would be brought into the building. This floor would have seen many loads of wagons and carts that would have brought in the raw materials such as the iron ore, the limestone, and the charcoal that were used to make iron. To the far end of the view is an arched opening that leads to the top of the furnace stack itself, and that's where the material would be poured into the furnace. Currently, we're inside of the room where the blast apparatus is located. And just next to me is what we call the Great Wheel. One of the things that makes Cornwall really stick out from many of the other furnaces that are located in the Mid-Atlantic region is just how intact the building survived. The furnace operated from 1742 up until 1883. But over that time, many changes happened here in Cornwall. The building that we're in right now largely dates to the 1850s. Much of that 18th century building only exists at the very lowest levels of our structure. The blast apparatus, which is next to me, it was composed of the Great Wheel, a pair of blowing tubs which sits above it, and also the steam engine, all of which that have survived intact up until this day. This was also the site of the much earlier blast apparatus, which would have been comprised of an overshot water wheel, a pair of large bellows, and for a time, especially the 1840s, it appears as if in tandem they were using steam and water power. To my right is the power source here at Cornwall Iron Furnace. Again, this started out as a water-powered operation, but by the 1840s, the family that operated this, the Colemans, decided that they needed a more efficient way in order to create air to blast for the furnace. So what they did is that they installed a waste heat system. So on top of the furnace stack are a pair of boilers. And those boilers use the heat created from the smelting process in order to make steam. That steam then comes down this large pipe into the engine itself. It pushes out a piston rod, creates motion, linear motion that's turned into radial motion, and that goes over and then turns the Great Wheel, which then makes the blowing tubs push air, and that of course creates the blast. So this is an engine that we feel was put in the late 1850s and 1859 to replace an earlier engine. This is a 20 horsepower engine, and again a very rare survivor here at the furnace. Welcome to the casting room of the Cornwall Iron Furnace. Iron ore and limestone, and would have been cooked in this large body of stone until its proper time. And then the furnace here was tapped about every 12 hours. And first the slag was taken out of the furnace, and then eventually the iron would be tapped. Usually they're tapping about 3,000 pounds of iron at a time. The largest by volume product that would have come out of this furnace was pig iron, though there are other domestic goods that were made. And during the American Revolution also 42 naval cannon were cast and taken to the port of Philadelphia. So this furnace saw a great amount of iron produced in its time over 1742 until it closed in 1883. Cornwall Iron Furnace today is made up of a 5-acre site. At one time, the iron plantation would have been in well of excess of 10,000 acres and was made up of agricultural fields, farms, mills, wood area, villages for workers, support buildings, and the furnace itself. Today, much of those things are still intact here at Cornwall Iron Furnace. On our 5 acres, we have 5 buildings. The furnace, the charcoal barn, which is the building that we currently are in and utilize as our visitor center, a blacksmith shop, a wheelwright shop, and the abattoir. But many visitors to the area also go and look at the other surviving buildings that are in this area. Across the street from us is Cornwall Manor Retirement Community. They have many more buildings, including the Iron Master's House, the Paymaster's House, and support buildings for the estate. Many visitors to the area also utilize our rail trails, which at one time were used to transport iron ore, also coal and other raw materials needed for the iron industry. So this vast iron plantation is still in many ways visible here on the landscape, though a small portion of it is what you can view when you come and visit Cornwall Iron Furnace. The museum has been a museum since it was donated by a granddaughter of Robert Coleman. Her name was Margaret Coleman Freeman Buckingham, and it was Mrs. Buckingham who gave the buildings over to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in 1932. Since then, this has been owned and operated by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and has been operated as a museum by the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. We have normal hours of operation throughout the season and welcome people to come and tour our facility.
Hello, my name is Renee. I'm an educator here at Codorus State Park, which is located in south central Pennsylvania, just over the Maryland line. We're going to be talking about our 5 plate stoves that were produced here at the Mary Ann Furnace, which was located within the park. The furnace was in operation from 1762 till about 1800. There are no remains of it currently, so we're doing some research out there to try and discover exactly where the furnace was located. So the Mary Ann Furnace produced cast iron kettles, cast iron pans, grape shot, and cannonballs for the Revolutionary War, and they also produced these 5 plate stoves. So these stoves were used to heat the house. They were comprised of 5 plates. There were the 3 on the side, the bottom, and the top. For this particular stove, we have 3 of the original plates that were produced here at the furnace, and we had reproductions made for the top and the bottom. The stove plates themselves were each about 50 pounds and sized about 2 feet by 2 feet, so that made the entire stove weigh about 250 pounds. So the stove would actually sit inside the living quarters, which in a German-style house was known as the stoop. So the stove would sit inside the stoop, and on the other side of the wall was actually the kitchen, which generally had a very large walk-in fireplace where they did all of their cooking. Inside that fireplace would have been about an 18 by 18 size hole that would have fed straight into the back of the stove. That opening is actually called an oefenloch, and they would take hot coals out of the cook fire and feed them right into the back of the stove. Then the cast iron plates would heat up, and it was a really efficient way to heat the house, and it kept smoke from the fireplace out of the living quarters. They generally didn't use them for cooking, although occasionally they would set a kettle or a plate on top to warm it back up. So this particular stove, the plates were from the first year the furnace was in operation. They were from 1762. On the side plates, it says George Ross and George Stevenson, who were the two original founders of the furnace. On the side, they also have a heart, which indicated love for your fellow man, and there's a triple tulip, or also known as a Trinity tulip, which in the Pennsylvania Dutch tradition stood for faith, charity, and hope. So if you're out on the Iron Road, I hope you stop on up to Codorus State Park. You can come to the Visitor Center and see our 5-plate stove, or you can hike our Marianne Furnace Trail. Thank you.
Until the early 1800s or so, before nail-making machines were developed, nails had to be made by a blacksmith, one at a time. To make the nails, the blacksmith could use rods bought from a refining forge after the iron was cast at a furnace, or from slitting mills. Or he used pieces of scrap iron or recycled iron from worn-out tire rims, tools, or leftover bits from other projects. If he was making nails from scrap, the smith would first have to form the scrap into a rod. Often it was the blacksmith's apprentice who made the nails. Making nails was a productive way for the apprentice to learn hammer control and to learn how to make and use a fire. The tools that the smith used were tongs, his forge, an anvil, his hammer, a cut-off tool, and a special tool called a nail header. Nearly all handmade nails were tapered and square. The blacksmith heated the rod in his forge, then he drew out the rod into a square taper, into the thickness he wants at the head end and the blunt point at the other. When the smith had the nail about to where he wanted it, he would cut partway through the nail, just above where he wanted the head, on his cutoff tool. Put the nail into the nail header. And if everything was still hot, you could then form a head on the nail. Just to shrink the nail a little bit so that he can get it out of his header easily. And you have a handmade square tapered nail.
My name is Andre Waltman from the Friends of Pine Grove Furnace State Park and the Cumberland County Historical Society. Greetings from Caledonia Furnace, which was built in 1837 by Thaddeus Stevens. This iron works included 2 forges and a rolling mill, as well as the furnace, which was famously destroyed by the Confederate Army during the Gettysburg Campaign of 1863. Thaddeus Stevens was a well-known radical Republican congressman and lawyer based in Lancaster County. And in the years before the Civil War, this ironworks was a stop on the Underground Railroad, along with the free African American communities of Africa to the west and Yellow Hill to the east, and the Quaker communities of northern Adams County. The Confederate General Jubal Early said that he burned this ironworks partly because of Thaddeus Stevens' abolitionist politics. The furnace was not rebuilt, although some other industry resumed after the Civil War. The modern state park preserves the reconstructed blacksmith shop, several water power features, including the head race for the furnace, and numerous charcoal hearths through the state park and the surrounding Michaud State Forest. Caledonia State Park includes the Forest Heritage and Discovery Center, a small museum across from the modern State Park office. What you see here today is a 1/3 scale model built by a civic organization in the 1920s.
We're going to make a doll today, a handkerchief doll to be specific. So if you take a look at some of the choices of handkerchiefs, these have all been donated to Catoctin Furnace. Some of them are pretty fancy, some are just plain. So if you don't have any handkerchiefs at home, ask your grandfather. He might have a big white one. Or ask your grandmother if she has any that she's willing to share with you. We are not going to be destroying them, so just you can reassure them that we're just going to make some ties. We're just going to tie them up. No cutting, no marking up, etc. So I'm going to show you a couple of simple ways to make things. So this is a very plain one, but we're going to select one that has a design on it. So here's one with a pretty little corner design. So when you're going to make your doll, you want to decide what's going to be the front of it. So I decide this one needs to be in the front with a pretty shape. So we're going to start, I'm going to put the design facing down on the table, fold in the two corners, and then make sure that they're overlapping just a little bit. And then we're going to take one cotton ball. This is going to be used for the head. So you place that in the center and fold it over. Okay. And then the next step is to make the head. So I'm going to select a piece of yarn, or maybe I'll use this pretty ribbon. Use a pretty piece of blue. Well, no, I'm not going to use this ribbon because that's a little too thick for this little fine handkerchief. So I'm going to use a piece of crochet yarn. It's a little bit heavier than string or thread. So take this and put it right underneath where the head's going to be. And you'll notice I'm selecting a piece, probably about 2 feet long. And I'm going to cut this off because it's much easier to work with. I'm going to put it around the head. This is the hardest part. Get a friend to hold the head down for you. Hold the cotton ball. And then you tie. This is where some tying skills are handy. Left over right. And then pull it tight. Oops. You're going to make sure you get that head down in there. So keep tightening it as you go. Okay, so now I have a head. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to the front side. See, I have this pretty design on the front. Okay, if you want that head to stay tight, remember we did left over right? Now we're going to do right over left and tie a knot in here. Because this piece of yarn tends to want to come untied. Okay. Now, there are a couple ways that you can make arms. If you think about what the young children back in the 1800s had. So they might have had a stick. So you could take a stick and place a stick in here. If you're going to make stick arms, you just take the yarn from the back, pull it up front. And tie it around the arms. Okay? And here you can make a pretty little bow. So there's your little doll. If you want to make one that has pant legs, I'm going to show you how to do that real easily. This is a much larger scarf. So this is called a bandana. To make a bandana, to use one of those, and we're going to make legs on this one. We're going to take it and fold it into thirds. So take this, fold it in, and take the other side and fold it in. We still need a head. So this is a much bigger doll, so we're going to use at least 2 cotton balls. I might even use 3 cotton balls for this one. We're going to make a big head on this doll. Okay. This doll, since this is such thick material, I'm going to straighten this up. I'm going to use a heavier piece of yarn. So again, I need about 2 feet. I'm going to cut this off. We'll start at the back because I always find it's easier to tie on the front side. Left over right. Pull it tight. Ooh, that rhymes. Left over right, pull it tight. Okay. Now, what's next? Right over left. Okay, there's your head. Now again, you could use your sticks for your arms, but I think what we're going to do is just create some arms just with our yarn. So you notice I put it underneath the corners here, and I'll pull it to the back, and I'm going to go left over right, and I'm going to do another one right over left. Okay. Now I want some legs. So take your material and separate it.
Hello and welcome to the 2021 Maryland Iron Festival. I'm Deb Spurrier. I'm with the Thurmont Regional Library, and today we are going to take you on an adventure through time as we look at how children's lives were during the time of the furnace. Now, you notice in the background I have the Iron Master's house, actually the ruins of the Iron Master's house. We are going to first look at what life for the Iron Master's children would have looked like. And then we're going to go on into the village to see what the life of the workers' children would have looked like. Come on, join me on this adventure. Although the Iron Master's house is in ruins today, Rose Hill Manor, located in Frederick, Maryland, is a close replica of what the house might have looked like at the time of the Catoctin Furnace. Today, we're going to go in and explore how the life of the Iron Master's children would have been. The Iron Master was wealthy. There were very few work responsibilities for the children of the Iron Master. Days were filled with learning through play. Some games they played are still favorites today, like tag, follow the leader, hide and seek, marbles, and musical chairs. A favorite outdoor game was rolling the hoop. Children used hoops from old wooden barrels and a stick for this game. They would race to see who could keep their hoop rolling the longest and farthest. This was quite more difficult than it looked, so much practice was needed. Wealthy families like the Iron Masters enjoyed many more luxuries than the enslaved and worker families of the village. Enslaved caretakers or servants would have assisted with caring for and entertaining the children outside or in their nursery each day. The Iron Master's children may have even played alongside slave children. Like kids today, children in the 1800s loved animals. Horses offered the ultimate adventure. On a wooden rocking horse, children could gallop wherever their imagination took them. A girl who owned a dollhouse was fortunate. Dollhouses were among the fanciest toys available in the 1800s. They were fitted with miniature people and furniture, just like the things found around the child's real home. Some dollhouses even matched the color and style of the child's house. Dollhouses provided hours of entertainment for the Iron Master's children. The Iron Master's home featured many bedrooms that were opulent and furnished with expensive fancy furniture and room for the family to spread out. Fireplaces were in most of the bedrooms to keep the family warm at night as well as on winter days. While some toys were extravagant, others were more basic. Wood was an abundant material of the time and was often used in toy craft. Here the children are playing with marbles and a wooden ramp to pass the time in the nursery. Young children learn through play, with toys such as blocks and puzzles. Some blocks had letters or numbers or pictures painted on them. Others were just plain, and they sparked the imagination in a child who might build towers, castles, and more. The ironmaster's children were likely educated at home. Girls at this time were taught writing, music, and needlepoint, skills that they would use as a grown woman around the home. Boys would have learned more academic subjects, like reading, writing, math, and science. Older, well-to-do children might have attended boarding school, which is a school far away from home where the child would have lived while learning. The parlor was a room in the front of the home, and it was usually furnished with the finest pieces and was where social gatherings happened. When families invited neighbors to visit, they played games in their best room. These games were known as parlor games. Today, we're seeing a young girl studying pictures with a stereograph. A stereograph created the first 3D images for viewing. Other pastimes of children were practicing musical instruments such as the piano. Piano study was more common for girls than boys, and it was a symbol of social status. Wealthy parents delighted in the playfulness of their children and indulged them with many expensive toys like china tea sets. These sets included miniature teacups, saucers, teapots, and even cake plates for treats. Children enjoyed the tea parties together as they acted out what they may have seen in the formal dining room as their mother entertained guests during the day.
Behind me, you'll notice a log cabin. Now, this was a log cabin that was here during the time of the iron furnace, and this would have been the cabin of a worker family. Let's take a little adventure inside to see what the daily life of a child might have looked like at that time.
Life was very different for enslaved children at Catoctin Furnace. While toddlers may have had a few years to play, an enslaved child's workload began as early as age 6, with tasks such as winding thread and carrying water. The Collier's log house in the village of Catoctin Furnace is the only double log house in the village, and it was home to not one but 2 worker families. Let's take a look inside. Worker children had many more jobs to do at home, such as helping with the cooking and cleaning. While father was working at the furnace during the day, the children pitched in to help mother with many chores. The outdoor held many tasks for children of all ages to help with. Older children would tend the garden plots, where the families grew their own fresh fruits, vegetables, and herbs. Drawing water for cleaning and drinking was another task small hands could handle. Houses back then did not have indoor faucets, washing machines, or even toilets. They did have a spring house or a well with a pump that had to be visited several times each day. On hot days like this one, teamwork was welcomed in getting all the chores completed before the sun set and father came home. That's when the family could have fun together by the fire. Grocery stores at that time didn't provide families with their food. Families would raise small animals or chickens for their food. Gathering eggs would have been the perfect job for a child. After the work was done, children had time to play. Outside games of tag, hide and seek, or follow the leader were popular here too. Jumping rope would have been fun if they found a discarded piece of rope. Village children would not have had many toys, and what they did have was homemade toys like these dolls that are made out of scraps of cloth and sticks. The home life of children in the village was very different from that of the ironmaster. There was less free time and fewer fancy toys, but the family was close. Everyone slept together in a shared room upstairs. We hope you have enjoyed this glimpse into the lives of children at Catoctin Furnace.
19 and 13, I started to roam out in the West. No money, no. I was drifting along with the tide, and I landed on the Great Divide, railroading on the Great Divide. There's nothing around me but the Rockies and sky, and there you'll find me as the years go by, railroading on the Great Divide. Just ask any old timer from down in old Cheyenne. The railroading in Wyoming's the best in the land. All those long steel rails and the short cross ties that I laid along the Great Divide, railroading on the Great Divide. There's nothing around me but the Rockies and sky, and there you'll find me as the years go by, railroading on the Great Divide. As I was a-walking out across the field, number 3's a-comin', she's the fastest on wheels. As she rolls through the valley, she collides with pride, rolling along the Great Divide, railroading on the Great Divide. There's nothing around me but the Rockies and sky, and there you'll find me as the years go by, railroading on the Great Divide. Railroading on the Great Divide. There's nothing around me but the Rockies and sky, and there you'll find me as the years go by, railroading on the Great Divide. I'll be railroading on the Great Divide.
The Greenwald Garden Club of Frederick, Maryland maintains the gardens of Catoctin Furnace, including a kitchen garden where there are strawberries growing. Let's learn a few things about strawberries. Strawberry plants grew wild in the Catoctin Furnace area. When the native people cleared the land for corn, strawberry plants sprouted up and grew. There was only one problem. They were tiny and bitter. The strawberry we eat today is from this original North American species. It was transformed in the delicious fruit we know and love by botanists experimenting with different plants to get a sweet berry. In the 1700s, trade was one method for acquiring new plants. All types of plants were exchanged between people in the New World, Europe, and other continents. Plant scientists experimented with crossing varieties to make the plants worthy of being planted in a home garden. The first commercial nursery was established in the colonies, and in 1771 they offered 3 types of strawberries for sale. They sold for about $1 for 12 roots. However, they were not native plants but were imports from Europe. In the 1800s, when home gardening was prolific, politicians decided to name plants after themselves. Examples include the Hubbard squash, named after a congressman, the Doolittle raspberry, named after a senator, and the Colfax strawberry, named after the Speaker of the House. However, the Colfax strawberry tasted bitter, and that did not help with the speaker's popularity or encourage people to buy the plant. Ask a friend to share their plants or purchase some from a local garden center in the spring. Strawberry plants send out shoots called runners. These will make new plants for the coming season. As a result, when planting your strawberry bed, leave room for future plants. To grow strawberries, you need only a few items: a designated space in your yard or even a container, a sunny location, a shovel, compost to help enrich the soil, grass clippings, water, and of course strawberry plants. To plant the strawberries, you need to first dig up the earth and work the compost into the soil and loosen it and give it nutrition. Place the strawberry plant in a shallow hole and cover with soil, leaving the plant crown showing. Space the plants 6 to 18 inches apart to leave room for the runners. When strawberries are planted in the spring, pinch off some of the blossoms. This will help the first year plant become stronger and your strawberries will be larger. In the summer, cut off the runners and plant these small plants in your strawberry bed. Water your plants regularly and enjoy eating strawberries in May and June. Strawberries are grown in every state in the United States. Over half of kids 7 to 9 years old say strawberries are their favorite fruit. According to the Guinness Book of Records, the world's largest strawberry shortcake was 827 square feet in size and weighed 6,000 pounds.
Welcome to the Maryland Iron Festival. This video, featuring Time Chef Henry Ward, was filmed at the Catoctin Furnace Historical Society's Collier's House in Thurmont, Maryland. Before European immigrants and enslaved Africans lived and worked at the Catoctin Furnace, the land was home to Susquehannock, Five Nations Iroquois, Shawnee, Tuscarora, and Piscataway.
And now, here we are at the end of the day, and if you had been interested in cooking along, there were instructions as you signed on to the site. You could go ahead and cook along with us to make salt potatoes. And so here are our salt potatoes. And so what you're going to want to do is have a pot with 1 cup of salt to 6 cups of water. And again, if you need 12 cups for the potatoes you're doing, you'll need 2 cups of salt. Get that to a boil, take small new potatoes, you're going to go ahead and put them in. They're going to cook in that super salty water, which actually raises the temperature of the boiling point. So these actually cook different than any other potato. Invented by workers at the salt plants up in New York. And since we're at the furnace, I thought it would be fun to tell the story and show you about that today. Here we have pickled beets. Beets are one of the first things that comes out of the ground in the spring, and pickling is the way to preserve everything. Anything that you grew, if you couldn't eat it right then, you had to figure a way of going ahead and preserving it, putting it up. And so in this case again, high enough sugar, high enough salt, high enough acid, it pickles it and will not let it ferment. So these are pickles out of the garden with a little bit of spice, and we're going to serve that today with a whole planked shad. The shad is American fish through and through, lives in the ocean, but returns to spawn in the waters of the Potomac, the Susquehanna, the James. And so shad fishing during the run in that middle part of April was a really big thing. And it was traditional to go ahead and actually nail it to a board and cook it outside in front of a fire. And we're going to go ahead and show you how to do that. We also, in springtime, one of the first things up are the greens. And so here we have a nice field green salad, and this one is going to be with a warm bacon vinaigrette. Trying to be seasonal, springtime in the valley here. And the other thing that's going to be coming up early are your spring greens. So your lettuces, spinach, red leaf lettuce, arugula, roquette. Around here, you'd also find narrow dock and dandelion and lots of other kinds of plants, purslane, I actually saw walking in here, that would all be used to make salads and or cooked greens. So this is an example of how you can go ahead and take one ingredient and really cook it completely two different ways. So we have here some bacon and the bacon grease that came from it. I could go ahead and cook these down with a little bit of that bacon, some salt, a little bit of red pepper, and have a nice set of greens. But we can also go ahead and turn around the same ingredients and make that into a salad. And so this bacon is still hot. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take our pan here, our salad bowl, put in some spinach, some of the mixed greens, that. Then we are going to go ahead. The garnish here is that nice crispy bacon. And so we're going to go ahead and add that in. But we also do not want to lose the bacon grease. Because in this case, that is going to be the oil in our oil and vinaigrette. So, take again, that off of the thing. We're going to go ahead and to this, we add sugar. Let's move this out of the way. We're going to add sugar, salt, sugar, and our vinegar. Whisk here. I'm going to go ahead and mix that in. Now this as a recipe has a In culinary terms, because this is a warm dressing, we would call this a wilted salad. But it's interesting that the country cook, this would be called a kilt salad. The idea that the hot bacon is basically going to kill the lettuce and give you a little bit of a wilt. And it actually helps to bring out the flavor in the greens and the bacon. I think just all of that. We don't want to overdo it. And now we're going to give this a nice toss. Add some more of each of our greens. That looks very good. And actually you can smell the bacon warmth coming off of the leaves. And come in here and garnish this. A little pretty, but also egg. Again, you have a chicken, so you always have eggs. And that way you always have a fairly easy protein that you can go ahead and add into almost anything that you cook. Always add a bit of egg. I've got a little unintentional color here from the beets, but that's just going to make it even prettier. Finish it off. And there you have a field green salad, kilt salad with warm bacon vinaigrette. We're going to finish off the meal with everyone's springtime favorite, strawberry shortcake, with our strawberry shortcakes that we have cooked in the hearth, and strawberries from the local market, whipped cream. All right, last but never least, dessert. Dessert would have been sort of a touch and go thing for lots of families. Maybe some sort of a fruit cake, or you might have some sort of cookies. But again, springtime, who does not love strawberry shortcake? And so we're going to go ahead and make a strawberry shortcake the old-fashioned way. So we have our batter here, our mix. So we've got some flour. This is a shortcake. So again, it has a good deal of shortening in it. Butter that's actually cut into it. And so we're also now going to add, we're going to use buttermilk this time since we have it. And it adds a nice little tang. This is basically, you're making a biscuit, but biscuit with, the fat already cut into it. And then in this case, we're also going to add, for a biscuit, you would be keeping them savory. But we want this not super sweet, because again, the shortcake is not really a super sweet cake. We want it to complement and not overpower the strawberries. So, go ahead, mix that batter. Just about right. And now, I am going to take the butter. I'm going to butter the inside of the Dutch oven. I'm going to get a little of that butter on my hands to help me handle the dough without it being too sticky. And so basically, I'm just going to go ahead and we're going to put these right into the Dutch oven. You're going to want to make them nice and flat, but you don't have to be too concerned. This is what's called a drop biscuit. As you can see, we're just dropping them in there. There's no rolling out or anything like that, because these are going to end up just being covered with strawberries and whipped cream anyway. So let's get the last one here. Get them about the right
right shape and size. Good butter so they're not going to stick to the bottom or the sides. There we go. And we already have preheated our oven. So I'm going to go ahead, bring this over. Our lid. Carefully place that on top. Slide it on back. Go ahead, get it cold. So that's our Dutch oven and our shortcake's cooking. That'll probably take about 20-30 minutes. We'll come back and get that and then get the table ready. All right, we are coming to the end of our cooking day and getting ready for our supper. And so we're going to talk about a beverage for this evening. In early America, the #1 alcohol beverage was cider. You make apple cider and you don't really have to try. Nature is going to make the hard cider for you because that's going to start to ferment. And so again, the fresh cider is only going to be good for a week or two. And at that point, you begin to control its fermentation, get the alcohol and get the bubbles in it. And so it's interesting that, again, apple cider was the most popular alcoholic beverage in early America. It eventually became supplanted by rum brought in from the Caribbean, so you could make punch out of that. You begin to get people around here growing grains, so you can get whiskey growers, whiskey distillers. And so whiskey really became the American alcohol, and then beer came in as well. But cider was the most popular early on. And it's interesting because I think it had sort of a reputation for being sort of a poor man's drink, that it was a country thing that the farmer made, and it wasn't something you bought from the store. So it sort of fell out of favor. And so it wasn't really until probably 30 years ago I remember hearing about hard cider. And now craft cider is a thing. There are actually a couple cideries in the Frederick area. And so we're going to go ahead. This is a farmhouse dry cider, and it is packed under pressure like champagne. So we're going to pop the cork and pour a cider. Now that came out a little bit faster than I'd anticipated, but again, it's a naturally fermented beverage. And so we'll clean up a little bit of the spill, but then take down the mask to wish you a toast. Thank you for coming to the Catoctin Furnace and enjoying our country bounty. Cheers.
same old train that brought me here is gonna carry me away again. Same old train that brought me here is gonna carry me away again. Ride on that new river train. Ride on that new river train. That same old train that brought me here is gonna carry me away again.